Mr. Fry,
Here.
Ms. Fitzgibbon,
Right here.
Mr. Jackson,
Here.
Ms. Sword,
Here.
Mr. Sullivan,
Here.
Ms. Tarpinian,
Here.
Ms. Genter, here. President Dirks.
Here. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in the agenda, the board would entertain any public comment that anybody would like to make. At this point, I've got 3 people signed up, so I'll call those names first, and then if there are others who'd like to address us, that's fine. I would ask that you come up to the podium for your comments, that you give us your name and address. And we've got a really, really long agenda tonight, so if you could possibly keep your comments to 3 minutes apiece, we'd really appreciate it. So, first up is Kelly Haugen.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Is loud enough?
Yep.
There too? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight regarding the staffing proposal at hand. My name is Kelly Haugen, and I'm a parent of a 7th grader and a 9th grader. I'm also a speech-language pathologist with a background working in schools. I've worked on many interdisciplinary teams throughout my career, which leads me to have many questions about this proposal. But I'll limit my time to the school psychologist discussion. I thank you for bringing this forward and welcoming the opportunity to share public comment as you consider next steps. I know that you all serve in this role because you have a strong commitment to our students and our community. We as a community trust that you continue to make good decisions based on data and research. Today I've provided each of you with an email including a number of helpful links and research articles that you may find valuable going forward. As I come here today, I have many questions about the proposal we have yet to hear details about, and I share some key points with you tonight. Number 1, do we have input from our current school psychologists in this decision? I truly don't know this answer, but I sincerely hope that we seek this input before we move forward with any of the rest of the considerations. I hope that we value their perspective as they are here doing challenging and rewarding work of building connections and creating a positive learning environment. Number 2, do we have clear definition of the roles and responsibilities of the Dean of Students, of the school psychologist, of the building principal? We all know that an effective school team includes a team of people, including all these teachers you see back here, SLP, social workers, counselors, administrators, and parents. The school psychologist role is essential at many levels of our school teams, not just assessment. Number 3, what training will the Dean of Students have? Will they have the same understanding of child development across the lifespan as a school psychologist does? Will they have the same access to research-based knowledge as the national cohort of school psychologists do? Will they have a thorough understanding of developmentally appropriate, evidence-based practice like our school psychologists are trained to have? Will they have knowledge of RTI implementation? Our school psychologists bring all of this to our teams and need our support. Number 4, what impact will this have on student behavior supports like PBIS? If our goal is to have more engaged students in the learning process, we need to be working towards positive strategies for behavioral learning with outcomes that are tied to evidence-based strategies that our school psychologists have extensive training in. The interventions that are implemented should be in a coordinated process with teachers, parents, and implementing what works based on research. School psychologists bring this perspective and need time for relationship building. Number 5, how do we protect the school education referral process with this potential decision? There is much to consider with the legally required due process for IEPs and evaluation timelines, and our school psychologists play a critical role in this. Stoughton is recognized for our commitment to students with special needs, and I hope that we continue to protect one of the key team members in that process. Number 6. What is the transition process reduction? Are there students with significant needs returning to the school environment here? If this is the case, we need more support in team members who have the mental health training we desperately need. School psychologists are key to de-escalating crises and working to set up our environment to have proactive strategies for prevention in the first place. Last one. Number 7. What is the ultimate goal here? Are we trying to shift duties to save money? It's really hard for me to imagine a situation where adding an administrator is a cost-saving measure. I believe that this decision would be ill-advised and short-sighted at best, and downright dangerous if we look long-term. This erosion of the definition of a school psych's duties means that we would continue to have a spiral down effect over time as we spread these professionals thinner and thinner. We've already seen challenges with staff retention, and this would continue to get worse. We have to make our district a competitor in attracting high-quality staff, and school psychologists often have a national field of options available to them, not just Dane County. If we are serious about supporting our professional educators, including school psychs, to be able to do the difficult work of relationship building with families, students, staff, and community, as well as promoting a safe, positive school climate, we need to boost this position, not reduce it. We should not dilute the positions we need most. So as I mentioned, I provided you all with resources that have been suggested to me by colleagues in the field of school psychology. There's also a doctoral program at UW-Madison, Whitewater, and Milwaukee, and all of those would likely be important partnerships if we're looking for resources in what school psychologists offer to our school's community. They can also be valuable places to recruit future team members if we're having challenges with retention. I'm happy to remain available, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
And I think I'm supposed to mention my address. Do you want-
Sure, please.
908 Roosevelt.
Thank you. Jonathan Doherty is next up.
Hello, everybody. Jonathan Doherty, SCU President. Before I share our concerns, I first think I need to provide some background regarding the staffing recommendations that we discussed later in the meeting. SASD currently has 4 full-time psychologists and only 4 of our 5 schools. After retirement at the high school next year, there will be 3 total, and apparently no hiring of a new psychologist. The 2 that remain at the elementary level will travel between those schools, and the elementary psychologist that transfers to the high school will then be required to go between the high school and the middle school. Considering national and local trends around mental health and trauma-sensitive care, especially at the middle and high school level where the reduction will be felt the most, this proposal seems tone-deaf. It seems even more inappropriate when taking into account both the increase in school shootings and our district's prioritizing of mental health. We understand that elementary principals are stretched thin. All staff in the district have more responsibilities than in the past. Some of the principals' workload might be eliminated when our color-coded compensation plan is replaced at the end of the year. Their work related to discipline and behavior will remain and may be best handled by addressing the underlying cause of the behavior, which is often mental and emotional health issues. This is the work of everyone, but especially and specifically psychologists. Interestingly, the school that seems to be struggling the most, River Bluff, currently has no psychologists and only 2 administrators for around 700 students. In addition, I've been told that River Bluff will next year re-enroll several students with significant needs who are currently at Richardson School. While this staffing proposal, the SEA seriously worries about a continued decline in morale at River Bluff, reduced safety as a result of more behavior problems that might be left inadequately addressed due to understaffing. We also worry about leaving mental health concerns unaddressed at the high school, again due to understaffing. And we worry about burnout among our current psychologists who don't want to see these problems increase and only to be pulled between different school buildings. Other districts in the area are moving in the other direction, adding mental health professionals, not reducing. We do understand our district's financial situation, but this is urgently important. People are recognizing mental health issues as one piece of keeping our schools safe. The SEA recommends not only maintaining our current number of district psychologists, but also providing more support at River Bluff in whatever form is affordable. As a related but separate issue, at the last board meeting, the SEA requested the SEASD and the SEA write a joint resolution about our shared stance on arming teachers. I see that one has already been written and is discussion item number 5. Before the board decides to put it as an action item for a future meeting, I would urge you to include the SEA in this final step. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Betters-Boubon, please.
Hello, Jennifer Betters-Boubon, 127 East Prospect Street. I am thankful that I can speak to all of you today and follow up on the email that I sent earlier this week. My concerns are related to the staffing plan, and they arise from a number of sources. First and foremost, as a parent in the district, I have concerns about reallocating resources away from school psychologists to deans of students. I have 2 children, Mary and Matthew, a 5th grader and a 3rd grader, both of whom have had a tremendous experience at Sand Hill. And in part, that is due to the strong universal systems of support that are in place, that are put forth by the school psychologist and school counselor. They are in classrooms, they are in the hallways, they are meeting students' needs, and they are creating a positive school climate. And my kids come home and they tell me about that. My concerns are also grounded in my previous work. I spent 11 years in a neighboring school district as a school counselor at an elementary school level. I saw the power of being part of an integrated leadership team that included administrators, school psychologists, school counselor, school social worker, all engaged in the important work meant to meet the diverse needs of students. I was part of a leadership team. We would meet weekly, we would discuss the climate, we would talk about students, and we did what was necessary as a team to meet the needs of those kids. I was lucky enough to have an administrator who actually went to bat and added additional school counselor support as he recognized the important role that we played in that school environment. My concerns are also grounded in the work I do currently. I am a professor in counseling at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. There I train both school counselors and clinical mental health counselors to do the important work to meet the mental health needs that are there in our world. You just have to turn on the news. I see the power that we can have if we provide early intervention and preventative efforts throughout schooling. My concerns are also grounded in research. I sent you all a number of articles that cited the important role that school psychologists have on mental health and academic outcomes. Their training is diverse, their training is comprehensive, and I have yet to see the research that supports deans of students and similar outcomes for our students. I would ask you as a board to consider the voices that you hear and have heard and will continue to hear as you make these important decisions. They do impact kids. They impact the climate of our schools. They impact this district and the mission of this district. And so I would just ask that you take that into consideration when you discuss that item later today. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wanted to address the board this evening?
Hi, I'm Carla Cornell Webley, 608 Hilldale Lane here in Stoughton. I happen to work at the middle school, but I'm also the mother of 2 7th graders and a 9th grader. My 9th grader has dealt with anxiety issues since 2nd grade. And we got to a point that as we were getting ready to go transition to the high school, I knew that it might not be the smoothest transition. So I did some proactive meeting with high school counselors. We still ended up at a point where it was really bad. And that's when the school psychologist stepped in and helped us. My son is back in school, he's attending his classes, and I don't know that that would have happened without the expertise of a school counselor. I work at River Bluff. The data that was being taken on trips to counseling, they were on track to see twice as many students as they had the previous school year. That's appalling. We need to have things in place to support kids.
Thank you. Was there anybody else who wanted to address the board this evening? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody getting up. So we'll move on to the next issue, which is the legislative update.
Thanks, Scott. I've included a legislative report that I'd written on the 16th, so things have somewhat changed since then. But everything there that you see, I let you read at your leisure. But there is one update, and that is that tomorrow there is a special public hearing scheduled by the Assembly. The Assembly Education Committee. It's tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and they are going to be taking input on the batch of Assembly bills that have been put forward for the special session. There are no special bills from the Senate, so we don't really know what's going to happen tomorrow in that session. But I'm just making sure you're all aware. I'm sure you can watch Wisconsin Eye if you really want to see what's going on there. And then later on we'll talk about a resolution that we have to talk about gun safety. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions about any of that? And we'll take up the resolution later in the meeting. All right, next up, Spotlight on Learning. Is that Mr. Dow?
Good evening, everybody. It's a great opportunity to step in front of you and share a little bit of information with you. Joining me is our co-head wrestling coaches, Bob Empey and Dan Spilding. And what I have here with me tonight is from our Wisconsin State Senate citation. I'm going to read that to you here tonight to present it for the district. Whereas the Stoughton High School wrestling team placed first in the 2018 State Wrestling Championship. And whereas this championship victory marks the 50th anniversary of Stoughton High School's first wrestling state title and the 30th anniversary of their last championship. And whereas the Stoughton wrestling team entered the state championship tournament ranked third and defeated the #1 ranked team, Holman, with a score of 31-29. And whereas the Stoughton team dedicated their season to legendary coach Laverne Pieper, who led Stoughton to their first state championship in 1968 and unfortunately passed away on October 1st, 2017. And whereas exemplary leadership shown by head coach Bob Empey and Dan Spilding and the team of young athletes propelled Stoughton High School to their 8th state championship. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Wisconsin Senate, on the motion of Senator Mark Miller and Representative Gary Ebel, along with the Wisconsin State Assembly, commend the Stoughton High School wrestling team on an outstanding season and wish them well in their future endeavors.
Thank you. And basically on behalf of the Stoughton athletic teams at the high school and beyond, we'd just like to thank the school board administration for allowing us some of the unique opportunities that we've had in terms of traveling and so forth. It helps us find competition and challenges our teams, helps prepare us for the end of the year, and quite frankly, our goal is to help our student athletes represent the Stoughton community and Stoughton schools as best we can, and you've helped us with that, so thank you very much.
Gentlemen, thank you, and please pass our congratulations on to the wrestlers.
And then we also have a little video from highlighting River Bluff.
We were given an assignment for social studies. We were told to make up our own country. So I got thinking about how founding fathers of America, they made their own Declaration of Independence. So I went home and I started writing up my own little Declaration of Independence. I was thinking about how functioning government would work. It was 5 pages-ish, and they all put in one big line, so I had to roll the thing up. I absolutely love history. I completely believe that people learn better when there's interaction. There was a ton of, interactive stuff that we do in the class, like I think a few weeks ago we were studying the Boston Massacre, and we had this little setup where we had this police tape set up on the other side of the classroom. We had all these different things inside the police tape. It was really, really cool, and we wrote down what we believed happened.
We did a mock trial to find whether Columbus was guilty or not of, he did a lot of brutal things to people, so we had to argue and like write a whole thing to prepare for this mock trial, and we finally had it. It was so fun. We had like this whole week preparing for it. I enjoyed it so much.
We try to make history really come alive, but we really try to get kids engaged and make it feel like it's real. One of my favorite days of the year is the first day of the Constitutional Convention, when we have the lights off and we have little candles and cool pens for every kid. Constitutional Convention is a unit that we do in which the students assume the roles of the men who were at the original 1787 convention. The kids each play a character, and they have to learn the views of that person, and they have to debate as if they were really there. When students get excited, it might sound silly, but it really helps them remember what they're learning.
We want the kids to be detectives, not just trusting the first source you're given, looking at the perspective of the source. Is this an accurate source you're given or not? Once they have that skill down at the beginning of the year, we really use that the rest of the year. Another way we look at that, those detective skills, is later on in the year we do lock boxes. Basically where the kids are trying to get inside this box before the timer goes off. It's set up as a mystery around the room. They have to find different sources and determine, is that source the accurate one that I want to use to get into this box here, unlock this certain lock using a certain code.
One thing we really try to do is help kids understand, how does the content that we're studying that happened so long ago actually affect them today?
And for that reason, that's why each year we like to offer this opportunity where kids can go to Washington, D.C. and see this in real life.
I wanted to go on the Washington, D.C. trip last year because D.C. is such like an important part of our country. It's like kind of where everything happens. I liked the African American Museum the best because it was like very eye-opening.
A good thing on the trip was that we were able to see so much in such little time. I think we saw a lot of the interesting points of the city within only 4 days. One of the things that connected with the class the most was probably what we learned about George Washington and seeing Mount Vernon and things like that. And we got a little bit into Lincoln in our history class, so we got to see the Lincoln Memorial. That was an interesting thing to see. There's a lot of symbolism of that place.
Even though we're American history 200-300 years ago, and primary amount of our curriculum, this is stuff that's still affecting our lives today.
It's really intriguing to understand what happened in the past and how we can prevent or have it happen again in the future. It's been really fun. I've been learning about a lot more about the American Constitution and American independence, and it's very interesting. I'm very excited for the rest of this year.
All right, next up is the district administrator's report.
Thanks, Scott. I just have two quick things. First of all, a reminder that next week is spring break, so the buildings will be quiet, and the tech department is taking that time to replace and upgrade our switches and our technology infrastructure. So if everything goes according to plan, each building will experience a lack of internet for a day, with this building being scheduled for Monday as they replace things in this building and then push it out. So I believe there is some expense on the consent agenda for today for some of the expenses to replace those switches. And then the other thing I had is the April 2nd board meeting, which will be the meeting 2 weeks from today, right after spring break. We will be at the high school, and we will be going into the Fab Lab for a hands-on learning experiment.
All right. Any questions about any of that? Okay, thank you, Tim. Next up is the consent agenda.
So move.
approval of the March 5th, March 5th, 2018 regular board meeting minutes. Move approval of the March 1st, April 3rd, 2018 check register and March 13th, 2018 PCAR statement as presented. A donation. A check from Stoughton Sport Boosters for $9,000 for 10 turf protection tarp, lacrosse uniforms, track and field equipment, and 2 sideline benches. Check from Sand Hill Working for Kids for $2,000 for physical education equipment and supplies, and those are proceeds from fund run in 2017. A check from Honoraries S Club from Mark Plexi, $500 for senior athlete plaques. A donation from James Prima and Shirini Adams, valued at $80 for 8 footballs for playground use. A donation from Girl Scout Troop number 2044 from Amanda Gopland, valued at $800 for cookies to be distributed to students and families in need. That's very nice. A related cash donation budget adjustment for $11,500. I move approval of the permanent educator contract for Alexa Harrison for the 2018-2019 school year. Move approval of the Stoughton High School Concert Choir field trip request to travel to New York to perform at Carnegie Hall on March 21st, April 2nd, 2019. And I move approval of the 2018-19 fall semester early college credit program and a start college program, which is known formally as youth options. Request in the amount of $12,675.38.
There's been a motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
I think Allison was first. Any questions or discussion on the consent agenda? All right, all in favor of approval of the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved. Under discussion items, the first item is high school pathways.
Hello, I'm Cindy Vaughn. I'm the school career coordinator, and I'm going to tell you about the Career Pathways Initiative that we have going at the high school. Brought handouts. Didn't really realize I needed to bring 100, but we'll go from there. I see that your agenda is very full tonight, and your issues are all very important. So, as not to keep you from that work, I'll try to be brief. And I trust that when you have more time, you will review the handout that you've been provided a bit more carefully, as it provides a bit more detail. This year, on a monthly basis, Stoughton high school teachers have learned about career development, career education, and considered the ways in which we all have a part to play in helping our students on their career decision-making journey. In September, we started our journey by considering how many careers are represented by a bottle of nail polish. In October, we staff mapped their own career journeys and shared their stories with others. In November and December, we looked at online career resources, including Career Cruising, which is the online resource that DPI provides to schools free of charge as part of the academic and career planning process. In December, we looked at things that were or resources that were more specific to careers or specific industries and for particular purposes such as labor market information and classroom resources and activities. In January, we looked at career and college readiness indicators, talked about those, how we felt about them, what they measured, and we talked about professional skills and their importance. Professional skills are also referred to as employability skills or soft skills. And we talked about how do they play into the world of work, and which is more important, hard skills or soft skills? We did some ranking of those and considered those kinds of things. In February, we prepared for ACT testing, and that brings us to now. We are, this month, preparing to take business tours, which we will do on Friday, April 13th. The high school staff will use their professional development time to visit businesses in the area. And if you look at the second page of your handout, which is actually the back of the first page, you will see a long list of businesses that have opened their doors to us. I personally find this an impressive list, not necessarily because I'm the one who's made all of those contacts and done that recruiting, but because I'm excited by those that are represented here. I think there are some pretty interesting places on that list, and I'm excited for our staff to have the opportunity to visit them. It's important for us as educators to visit business and have conversations with business. This is where our students will go in their careers, and it's important for us as educators to have a dialogue with those businesses, to learn what they do, how they operate, and what are their needs, so that we can better improve what it is that we do. One of the things that was very impressive to me as I started this, and first it was generating the places and then making the contacts, was the reception that I got. Businesses overwhelmingly were interested in what we're doing and excited to open their doors to us. I heard a lot of, well, that's cool. Well, this is very interesting. Thank you for including us. There was only one business that simply said, I'm sorry, we can't accommodate you. Another business was willing to do it and then realized that it was the day that they start their or their flex schedule, and nobody's going to be in the building that Friday afternoon. So they passed but said perhaps another time. On Wednesday, our staff will learn where it is that they're going. They're going out in groups of 6. So we have 13 groups of staff going out into the business community in groups of 6. They will learn where they're going. They will be asked to research the industry. They're being given the website. They're being given contact information so that they can learn about the business before they go. Essentially, this is a job shadow for adults instead of students, and it will mirror what we ask students to do when they go on a job shadow. It is expected that they will come up with some questions that they want to ask, and what is it that they want to learn about while they are there as well. And they will define their responsibilities, They will need to make contact with the business prior to going. It is expected that when they come back the following Wednesday, the 18th of April, they will share their experiences with one another. We invite you to participate in that if you would like to come. It will be an after-school. It would be the regularly scheduled after-school meeting. They're expected to send a thank you to the businesses as well to show appreciation for the time that they've invested in and given up for us. And we're asking them to take a picture of themselves while they're there, which I think will probably turn into sort of a fun thing for them to do as well. So in May, we'll do some reflection and talk about what did we learn through this and how it might impact our curriculum changes and how we want to move forward with this information. Do you have questions for me?
I do.
Steve, go ahead.
This is really interesting, so thanks for sharing. What day was the meeting, the reflection meeting?
So they're doing the business tours on Friday, April 13th. They are sharing their experiences, which I think is what you're asking me.
Yes.
On Wednesday, April 18th.
18th, okay.
And that would be at 3:30 in the multi-purpose room. Right? or the large cafeteria, whichever one I have.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And we welcome you to attend. Yes?
Do you know of other schools that are doing something like this? And the reason I ask is the company I work for, which may have been one that you reached out to and declined just because of security issues.
Well, I'll put it down for the next time.
In Iowa, they have a program called Extern.
Externships?
Yes, and it's really cool.
Mhm.
And so instead of one day, you have the whole
week.
summer, and you're paid and all that. So do you know if we have anything like that in Wisconsin?
I know that it has happened at times. I don't know of any school district in this area who offers externships currently.
Okay.
This is something that's happened over the course of many years, and some things sort of bubble to the surface and are what people do for a while, and then it fades. I think this could be a precursor to doing something like that. You're right, those experiences are often paid. They may last a week, they may last a longer period of time, and it would be a much more intensive experience than what we are doing.
Yeah.
In terms of are others doing this, I have not heard that others are doing this, but businesses thought that it was a great idea.
Yeah. Well,
So-
congrats for leading it.
Pardon me?
Congratulations for leading it.
Yeah, thanks. It's been fun. A lot of work, but fun.
Questions from anyone else? Yoli?
Yeah, I agree. You took all my questions.
Oh.
Except for one. So how do you choose the staff that are going, or they just say, I want to go? What is the process?
So at the start of the year, or prior to the start of the year, at the end of last year, we had established the career pathways, and we introduced this initiative to the staff. And at that time, what we identified, and it's on your document, it's not on the one that I have, but we identified that there would be 6 career pathways at Stoughton, or that we call Stoughton High School Career Pathways. And they are a grouping of the 16 national pathways based on commonality in knowledge and skills, commonality of jobs, and looking at what courses do we offer. So that what courses, not everything fits in every pathway, and some of our classes don't necessarily fit in any pathway, but we could see commonality or strands within within our courses based on the course descriptions and the types of careers that are within those pathways. We asked staff to choose a pathway team, and for the whole year, what happened, sorry, I'm jumping. They were assigned to a pathway team. Each pathway team has roughly 13 members and includes representation from all disciplines in the school. Those people then met on a monthly basis and did these, what I described as what we did each month. So for the groups, each group represents 2 pathway teams. So 3 people from Health and Human Services, 3 people from Science and Math. I was the one who did those group assignments, and they are assigned to visit a business that has a relationship to their pathway. It'll be a bit of a challenge for them perhaps or that's part of their challenge, is to figure out how and why. Some were more evident than others. Exact Sciences, do you know who Exact Sciences is, what they do? Makes sense that Health and Human Services would go there. Perhaps Science and Math as well. Cummins Filtration, Engineering. Every business has administration and management threaded through it. So that was sort of easy, except as we started looking at them and thinking about who they would see or talk to, it wasn't that we could have one from every one of those, a representative on every pathway or on every visit.
Thank you.
Other questions?
We appreciate the opportunity to do this. Thank you for allowing us to use our Professional Development Day for this. And I hope that it's of great success and we will continue to do it. It's not for a lack of businesses.
Thank you. And I guess I also just wanted to highlight that, as we all know, one of the pillars of our strategic plan is partnerships within the community. And this is just the sort of thing that we're aiming at. It's good networking for the district. It's good networking for our teachers and a learning experience as well. So thank you.
You will notice that not all of the businesses are in Stoughton.
Right.
Some are, but if we look at our labor market region, it extends beyond Stoughton.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, next up, we're due for an update on the compensation committee.
Hi there.
Hello.
Thanks for the chance to update you. As promised, we are back in March and are making progress on a new compensation plan. I always think that it's important and appropriate that we first start by acknowledging all of the members of the committees over the years who have committed so much time to this effort and really have continued to do so. So I would recognize those who are in the room and those who have participated over the years. Recognize them for that. Throughout the lengthy process, regardless of which iteration of the committee was sitting around the table, committee members have worked extremely hard to examine various alternative compensation models to create or revise a framework that might work for educators in the district. They've engaged in thoughtful and candid conversations about the district's priorities and values. They have listened and heard their colleagues' cares, concerns, and frustrations, and have kept that input top of mind during their committee work. They've been committed to the process of finding the best solution. They've established a solid set of criteria against which to measure the potential models, and they've worked hard to communicate their progress and be transparent in their efforts. So we appreciate this opportunity to come and talk to you. It's worth noting that throughout the process, some key lessons have been learned by the committee. You don't work this hard at something for this long and not walk away with some important pieces that have helped really to drive where we are today. The first is that communication is critical, obviously. When and how information is shared, and it's kind of going through the necessary process has been really important. And so I'm pleased to share with you today some of the most recent input that we've received from people. The implementation of the compensation plan should include enough time for the plan to play out and evolve so that its real value can be observed. And that's something that the committee has been hopeful about in their plan as they go forward. And a compensation plan cannot be used to address all of the needs of the district. Previous models, as you know, as we have updated, you have attempted to do a lot of things and track professional development and professionalism and collaboration and all kinds of things, and it's become very clear that it is neither possible nor desirable to use a salary to achieve all of those objectives. So since we last met with you in December, they have been hard at work kind of further refining that model that was talked about then, which is, as you recall, a kind of more foundational model. In addition to their own review and consideration, they've also reviewed the input that you offered during that presentation, shared an update on the development of the framework at the January 15th Professional Development Day, and collected input from educators via a brief online survey as well as focus groups that have been held in each of the buildings. So today we are here to update you on the current simplified model that's currently in development. In the updated version, the key objective remains the same: to create a sustainable, well-defined pay structure that retains and attracts quality staff. And we will come back to it to talk specifically, but the criteria also has really remained intact throughout this entire development process. As we reported in December, the current version of the model is based on examples that we have seen in Iowa and North Carolina, and they have essentially two components. One is an annual increase of the same dollar amount added to the contract pay for all educators who meet basic criteria. And the second piece is a retention incentive increase for educators upon the completion of particular milestones. While the committee has explored other elements and considered additional components to include, these two pieces really are at the core of what's being considered. It's these two pieces that we'll focus on when reviewing the input that we've collected over the past several weeks from educators. So the first tool that we used was a survey. It was sent out to all educators. It was in the field for around a week. We had about almost 70% of educators participating in the survey, so the responses were statistically valid and provided feedback from all levels, all departments, all buildings. And not only did the survey gather quantitative data, but we also allowed opportunity for quantitative data. We got qualitative data as well by allowing people to respond to the questions or the statements or pose any questions that they might have. So we got a lot of input from that. In the survey, we also did delve into the question that you raised about performance excellence, and so we looked at that, and we talked also about the teacher leadership or specialist roles that we had introduced last time and were considering. So to the question of how strongly would educators agree that an annual increase should be the same amount for all, 42% agreed strongly and 30% agreed somewhat, while only 21% disagreed and 7 were unsure. If you kind of listen a little bit to the voices that came, I did some examples here so that you could hear how that translated, what people were saying about it. This is from people who supported the annual increase. Comments that they had ranged from, I would hope it would encourage people to work hard and put students first. A lot of talk about not subjective, or the more black and white the better, that there's no bias. If you're doing your job, then you get the same as everyone else. So that's reflective of a lot of the comments that we heard along those lines. For those who were in that 21% who said that they would not be supportive of an annual increase, some of the rationale we heard was that not all educators are the same, so why should their increases be? It should be based on performance, not the same amount for everyone. Some people do more than others. We should be compensated for this. So that was kind of a peek into what we heard for responses from those who didn't support that annual or that equal amount increase. When we asked about support for allocating a portion of the compensation resources to a retention increase, 80% supported the idea, while only 9% were not supportive and 11% were unsure. Again, I have some examples here for you to see. For those who were in support of an increase like that, teachers would be more likely to stay with the district. Teaching is hard, and it's a way to acknowledge educators who have successfully navigated the early years. I think the greatest benefit of allocating resources to keep our staff would be that we would show the teachers that our district values their commitment to our students. As we looked at feedback from those who weren't necessarily in support of that, really it wasn't that they weren't in support of it, it was more that they had questions about when those retention incentives would be given, how much it would be, if it would span their career, things like that. So those really were the only questions that were posed regarding the retention incentives. So then based on the feedback from the surveys, the committee did some modifications based on that and convened a series of small group sessions. So my colleagues and I went into all of the schools over the course of 2 weeks. We had one-hour meetings with educators. We did 11 of them, and there were about 53 people who took part in them. And it was nice because some of the committee members had an opportunity, given when the times were, that some committee members could sit on those sessions as well. So they were able to interact with their peers. So we dug a little bit deeper into the annual increase in retention pieces during those focus groups so that we could get more, kind of more texture to what we heard in the surveys. And participants agreed that increases in the same dollar amount were indeed the most fair way to distribute the annual increases. There was a lot of talk around it, but as we looked at alternatives, the conversation went back to it's probably the most fair way. Questions did arise about the amount of the increases and the timing of when they would know what those amounts were. And then regarding the retention incentives, the questions were around, again, when they would be given. And much of the discussion did revolve around the importance of acknowledging and valuing the commitment to the district. So that was definitely a reoccurring theme, that importance of acknowledging those people who commit to the district for a long time, and certainly recognizing and welcoming those who come into the district as new educators as well. So we also collected feedback, as I mentioned, on the question that you raised, some of you raised last time, regarding excellence and rewarding excellence or merit pay. So in the survey, the question, how strongly do you agree the compensation framework should include a way to compensate educators for excellent performance? 53% of respondents said they agreed strongly strongly with that. 0% offered suggestions or input on how to demonstrate that excellence or how to measure it. So clearly it's the conundrum that remains. So at this time, the committee believes that the topic should be revisited at a later date by a different committee, and that it will not be included as part of the recommendation that we make. So as I said, the two pieces, looking kind of more closely at those, based on that feedback, where we are currently is an annual increase to contract pay that would be in the same dollar amount. The annual increase would be given to all educators who successfully complete their professional responsibilities of their role, building, and district, including regular collaboration and interaction with colleagues. This annual increase also requires that an educator not be on an improvement plan. Additional ways to increase the contract pay, as we had mentioned last time and remains the same in the draft that's being worked on, is that national board certification would be a $1,500 annual stipend. And still looking at master's degrees to recognize those that are in process already and those who maybe have not been acknowledged for those since the transition. The second element is the retention incentive. In an effort to retain quality staff, educators would receive a retention bonus in addition to the annual increase after successful completion of their 3rd, 5th, 10th, 15th, 20, 25th, and in 5-year increments. After that, consecutive years in the district. The committee is looking at financial models and are looking at increases after the 3rd and the 10th year to be slightly larger. Specifically, they're looking right now at $2,000 in recognition of the district data that says that these are important milestones in an educator's career and historically have been times when educators may choose to leave the district. A $1,000 increase would be given after the completion of the 5th, 15th, 20th, etc. years. All of the amounts in there, of course, are subject to funds available, which is noted in the presentation. One other note that I wanted to make, because we did collect a lot of input on this, was that we were calling it teacher leadership for a while. It evolved into specialists. So we did talk about that. And it was looked at in both the focus groups and the surveys. The committee essentially felt it was important to acknowledge that at the sunset of the career ladder, that work being done at the district professional level, so those things that were meeting district needs, that they still needed to be done. And they believe creating positions as needed to do that work would be an important aspect of the transition into the new system. So these positions would be clearly defined, in a specific job description designed to meet district, department, or building needs. Feedback from educators on this topic indicates that most recognize this need and agreed that any such positions should be well-defined, posted, not overlap with existing positions, have a transparent hiring, selection, and reporting process, and last for a set period of time. So the committee believes that the framework for creating these types of positions is important, but should be left as an administrative function and will be beneficial to the district and would augment the compensation plan, but wouldn't necessarily be a part of the compensation plan. So the committee believes this current draft meets the key criteria against which they're measuring the potential success of the plan. First, they believe it aligns with the district vision because it focuses on compensating educators who commit to advancing student learning by recognizing them for doing their jobs. It seeks to retain quality staff by offering annual increases and incentives for staying with the district throughout their career. It can be used to attract new staff because it is clearly defined and transparent, and it is easily implemented. Throughout the process of talking with and listening to educators in the district about the compensation plan, there were a few other items that arose that the committee believes are not necessarily directly related to their work, but are worth sharing. The first is that there were some consistent misunderstandings and questions about the pay structure and retirement calculations. Something that has come out of that is that we've identified a need to provide information that we believe would help clarify that, and think that that's an important in helping kind of with the understanding of what's being recommended. So a plan is in place to begin that process. Second, there was a clear desire to commit to a compensation system for a period of time. So while it can't necessarily be the committee's decision, it will be part of the recommendation to allow the new plan to play out over a period of time. And finally, when we went out and talked to educators, there was a kind of a keen recognition of some what were coined inequities in salaries and a desire to not further compound those inequities while inquiring kind of how the district will catch up. The committee clarified that its role was to recommend a compensation system that would be used going forward and not to make any salary adjustments. But we did hear it frequently enough that we thought it was worth acknowledging. So the committee will continue its work to fine-tune and revise a plan for recommendation to you in April, as you requested, with the hopes that a plan would be able to be voted on in May. And that's it. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Questions, anyone? Great.
Can you talk a little bit more about the idea of the framework for identifying and hiring individuals for the newly defined jobs? So is that committee work that we're talking about, or is that?
What I can tell you is, I will explain it kind of as an aside because it's not being recommended as part of the plan.
Okay.
The idea was that the committee thought it was important enough that we recognized that there were jobs to be done, that taking away the career ladder and the pillars, that there were still district needs that needed to be addressed. And the idea was that they were things that weren't currently being done. So it was a vehicle, a framework, if you would, for future opportunities to identify those needs, and it would be much like stipends for extracurriculars, et cetera, are already in place.
Sure. And can I ask you to give me an example of what something like that might be?
I would turn to Julie.
It could be a curriculum coordinator, for instance, at an elementary level. You don't have one math coordinator that helps to coordinate the entire thing, or even for that matter, one per building. And so where there may need to be some continuity between buildings, helping to define both that horizontal continuity, but also vertical alignment. Those are not jobs that we have people that do that work here and there. but by having it as a position, it would be routine communication back and forth and between buildings, and the routine work could be done.
Thank you, that helps me understand it.
Other questions? Gilda?
More than a question, I think is also, along with what Frank was asking, is being at the convention last January, is that right? I went to one of the talks about different compensation plans, and there were 3 different districts, and one thing that was common was that they implemented the plan in phases, basically. So they implemented the plan, but continuously with adding or changing different things. That is because, like what Judy was explaining, a different position, or they added, for example, one of the districts, professional development. Well, is it going to be in district professional development or college credits? And then they were adding different things. So I think, for what I'm seeing and all the way we've come to here, I appreciate all the job that all of you have been doing, because it's been a long process. Having something like this, it will probably continue changing with the time. I think it will be always a work in progress. Not like every year we're going to be doing something new, but so I think that's something to take into account too.
Having a mechanism for assessment.
Being flexible, I guess.
Other questions?
Alice?
Just kind of a matter of clarification. So this would be not percentages, it would be specific dollar amounts.
Correct.
Based on years of service?
It would be the same amount for everyone.
Okay. But okay. And I guess that I'm wondering, so we're starting at current salary, is that?
So the transition plan, as we're looking at it right now, takes everybody at their current salary, moves them in with their current number of consecutive years. And so everyone would be eligible for that annual increase. And in addition, if people were at those milestone years, they would get the annual increase as well as a retention incentive for that year. So you would carry with you your current salary, and you would carry with you your years of service.
Thank you.
Other questions? Joe?
I guess it's a question for Tim. Is May a good time frame for us? Is this going to be rolled out for next year, if that's when we receive this?
I think some of it depends on what the final recommendation is. Some of it depends on the implementation. So as it currently is, this would be an easy one to implement, because as Lynn said, you're just rolling everybody over of your current salary, and then at negotiation time, you determine, based on board authority, you negotiate what the increase is for everybody, and I'm assuming, but that'll be a conversation for the board to discuss if this was approved, I'm assuming retention, whatever we're calling them, would come off the top of whatever board authority is. So let's say board says we can spend $300,000 on salary increases, but again, I don't know if the committee has talked about that, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but one model might be $300,000, let's say $50,000 is on these retention, but those are all conversations and those are all questions when the final proposal is made in May, that getting more information and whatever's approved, I think then we have to have some conversations on implementation, on making sure we don't make the same mistakes we did the last time and rush it through. And you don't want to place anybody in the summer, but if we're just taking what they currently make and moving it over to this new structure, that's less of a roadblock than it was with the current compensation where everybody had to be evaluated and placed in a different band. So it's a long story of, I don't know.
Yeah, well, you hit on my concern, which is, is this enough time, I guess, for people to understand? Because that, was part of the problem last time, is it just was rolled out in a pretty confusing fashion, and I'd just as soon avoid that pitfall this time. So it's to be determined. It's
right, and so one of the things that the board may ask is, in May, how's the communication been? Do we have any feedback from people as do they understand it or not? And that can be a survey, that can be Lynn with her focus groups, that could be talking to the staff. It could take many forms. However the committee wants to determine, are we confident that people understand what is being proposed?
Other questions? Yeah, Steve. When are contracts signed? Is that June, July?
The letter, the intent is due in June, but the actual contract is out in August.
August, okay, thank you.
And we have in years past, as far as, it's a rarity in this district that we have a settled contract in August. So the dollar amounts that have always gone out in August was the current dollar amounts they are making now. And then they get a revised contract once it's set.
Okay. Donna?
Maybe Erica can help a little bit with this. I'm by having a set amount, I'm struggling with, number one, what is there gonna be to negotiate anymore? And number two, what's base building and what's gonna be supplemental?
So we talked about this a little bit at our last meeting too, and that was part of what Lynn was talking about as far as providing some additional information and clarification to staff. As far as the set dollar amounts, you mean for the retention increases at 3, 5, 10, 15?
Well, just the increases every year. I mean, what's negotiable is the CPI and whether it's going to be a percentage or a set dollar amount. It sounds like we're just saying now it's a set dollar amount, and we know that if it's a set at $1,000, we know what the amount is.
Yep, so what we've done in the past, whether it was when we had the career ladder or even prior to that, is that we did negotiate based on the law, the amount available within the CPI and the distribution of that. And there were a couple of years after Act 10 where the distribution of base wage was a flat dollar amount per FTE. In addition to that, the board also added supplemental pay on top of that, and it was the same dollar amount per FTE. Since that point in time, we've also had contracts where we have negotiated that the base wage increase was a certain percentage, so the base wage increase for each individual employee was a different amount, and then the board added supplemental pay on top of that to reach the total increase per FTE. So again, we could look at how we wanted to do that. We would go through that negotiation process to determine that, but I would say that, again, within the bargaining context, you have a certain dollar amount that you can bargain up to, and then the distribution of that. So we've done that in different ways in the past, and I would think we would continue to do that in the future. And just going back to the retention increases versus the annual increase, the committee talked about having those set dollar amounts for the retention increase in place in the plan, not dissimilar to what we did with the career ladder and the leveling over process. And then that annual increase would be determined every year based on funds available and all the other pieces that go into that. So for example, in a year with the career ladder, when we had fewer dollars that we had to allocate toward the leveling increases, that made more available for the annual increases that were distributed to everybody. So we would probably look at this plan in the same way. If we had a year where there were fewer people that were hitting those milestones of 3, 5, 10, et cetera, and we had to allocate fewer resources to those retention pieces, it might free up more funds available for that annual increase.
And then the years that the CPI exceeds that $1,000, then what do we do then?
The losses you bargain up to the CPI. So, I mean, it doesn't mean it's a requirement. I mean, we've never experienced that yet, so I think we'll have to talk about that when we come to that point in time.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Well, I guess I'll piggyback onto that.
Stay put.
Yeah, well, because I think there are some misunderstandings about what is subject to negotiation. I'm not on your part, but I think on some other people's. It's not simply CPI for this year is going to be about 2.25%, which is much higher than it's been since we started the career ladder, which made it easier to do things the way that we were able to do them. Going to Donna's point, you know, we're saying $1,000. Well, that's probably about 2.25% of the entire payroll. We're pretty darn close to it. So it's not just that we negotiate up to cost of living, but it's the distribution. And that's where I think this plan is going to run into a problem, because it says everybody's going to get the same amount. Well, when CPI is only 0.016, like it was a couple years ago, that's easy. You know, we just give everybody that and then we can do the rest. If CPI is 2.5% or 3%, which is going to be more than $1,000 a head, that is all subject to negotiation. We can't just say it's going to be a flat dollar amount for everyone. That's subject to negotiation between the SEA and the district. So one of the objectives of this whole plan all along is for it to be predictable. Well, when inflation's real low, it's predictable. But if inflation gets a little higher, like it's going to be for this year, that makes it a lot less predictable.
I would say, again, we'll have to cross some of these bridges when we come to them, but I do hope, we've been working, you know, as a team for a very long time. We have had members on that team that have definitely brought a union lens, and the hope is that if we are agreeing to the plan, whether it's a base wage increase or a supplemental increase, the funds available are still the funds available. And I'm hopeful that if we have a plan that we're agreeable to, that bargaining process will honor that plan that both parties support. Again, whether it's base or supplemental, but again, the hope is that if we support the plan, we can use it as our framework through that process.
But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is whether we can honor that easily or not is going to be very dependent on what CPI is. If CPI ends up being 4% next year, for example, that's going to be a lot more than $1,000 a head, and yet the union is entitled to negotiate that with us.
I totally understand that, and I think the $1,000 that was on that slide was just an example of what a flat dollar amount could be. There was that little asterisk, you know, it can be ran on an annual basis depending on, you know, resources available.
Sure. But this is aside from resources available. This is based on CPI, my point.
Well, but purely from a fiscal lens, I mean, if you have to bargain up to a certain dollar threshold, if the funds aren't available, that's part of the process. I mean, my understanding of the law is that that's the cap, it's not the minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been fortunate in this district that we've been able to provide those supplemental increases to go above and beyond what's been a pretty low CPI. So we just haven't experienced that bargaining process when the CPI has been higher than what we might have budgeted.
Right. Frank, go ahead.
So and this is more a question for you, Scott, is part of your concern that if we have a high CPI ceiling, say 4%, that we will end up either giving varying amounts or varying percentages to individual staff? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. See, in previous years, because CPI was so low,
right,
we could give everybody a CPI increase and still have a lot more money left on board authority that we then distributed as supplemental pay, and we did not have to negotiate that. And in fact, up until this year, we didn't. We implemented our last offer. In other words, because the vast majority of that money was supplemental, we essentially decided on our own how that was going to get distributed. Under this plan, if we have a high CPI year, We're not gonna be able to do that. That has to all be negotiated, and that takes away from the predictability of this.
So we can't, if we have a high CPI, we may not have the ability to give people an equal dollar amount, which is what this compensation plan is looking at, and an equal percentage rate, which is what we bargained with the union. Is that what you're saying?
Right. What I'm saying is that it will be subject to negotiation, whether it's a flat dollar amount or a percentage amount, depending on how high CPI goes. This year, it's going to be about 2.25, which board authority last year, I believe, was 2.5. So we're already pretty darn close. And then if you take this retention money off the top of that, well, then what's available if we budgeted 2.5 like we've traditionally done the last couple of years? Well, then all of a sudden you don't have enough money left to give everyone a CPI increase. That concerns me because I see this coming back then in a couple of years as, hey, you know, you said this is going to be predictable. Well, this isn't predictable then. It's predictable as long as inflation stays very, very low, but not if it doesn't. Other questions for people? Otherwise, I've got another one. Okay. I am concerned that the two things that made this district go to the present compensation model was that the old steps and lanes simply was not financially sustainable. The other reason that we went to a different model is because we wanted to reward excellence in performance. Now, this plan does a lot to try to be predictable, although I think I've just raised one potential flaw with it. The concern that I have is that this plan does absolutely nothing to address the second reason why we left steps and lanes, which is to reward those who do a better job than others. And I understand it's a really hard thing to measure. I get that. At the same time, the focus of this committee in getting feedback has been entirely from staff. I'm concerned about the feedback we're going to get from the community when if we were to approve this, we go back to saying to the taxpayers, doesn't matter how well a teacher does his or her job, they're going to get the same raise as a teacher that maybe doesn't do as well. How does this board justify that?
I don't feel comfortable speculating what the community is going to think. I've talked to a number of people in the community, and I've not heard once the reward performance as an issue. So I respect what you're saying. We have to honor what the community says, but I feel like we're speculating that. And I'm not, at least personally, I'm not comfortable speculating what the community is going to think about the reward piece. I actually think this plan is on the right track. I'm questioning the process. Are we giving them feedback now to take back and make modifications based on what we're doing here, or are we debating the plan here in response to eventually making the decision? But I feel like we're on the right track based on all the feedback that's been given, based on all the things that have transpired over the last year, and I want to commend you for that work. I certainly, there's not going to be a perfect plan. We've talked about that. There's not going to be a perfectly predictable plan. There's not going to be a perfect plan where we're going to make everybody happy. But I think based on the data that I'm seeing and based on the discussions I've had, I feel like this is on the right track.
Well, to address your question, this is a discussion item, so it's an opportunity for the board to gather information, ask questions, but also to discuss. We're not voting on anything tonight. I can say that I have talked to community members who are concerned that that a plan not reward excellence in performance. I think that's a legitimate concern. And I agree, right now, we're speculating other than what each of the 9 of us may have heard from people in the community. And I guess that's sort of the point I was raising, is we haven't done anything to get feedback from the community. And it would seem that since the community's paying for this, that might not be a bad idea.
I don't know if you feel that this is a strong enough component or not, but one of the pieces that we've talked about this a lot. And we felt that really if somebody is not doing their job correctly, it's an evaluation issue.
Yes.
And that was the intent around that piece where if someone isn't performing up to expectation, it's up to administration to look at, the improvement track for that. And one of those processes is a plan of improvement, which there was a piece in there that identified if somebody is on one of those plans, that we would not be looking to give that person an increase until they were to get off of that plan. And typically those plans, well, not necessarily, as I say, through an evaluation process, those plans can be generated, but it doesn't have to be. There could be other ways that those plans can be created. So again, that is part of addressing that concern around continuing to increase pay if somebody's not performing up to expectation. So that was part of the intent around that, and kind of the result of a lot of conversation around that concern.
Sure.
If I could just interject as well, I think based on the feedback that we have heard really very consistently, I believe that this district aspires to have a plan that can do that. I believe that it is not ready for that, and that there needs to be some time to have something that is consistent for a while. And I mean, we saw 53% of people are interested in it, educators. So we know that there is an appetite for it, but because we haven't come up with a way to do that, the recommendation to have it be something that we look at in the future and kind of work toward that, because I do think that there's an interest.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, you absolutely made my point, and I completely agree. I think that this is the right plan at the right time. I think we need a plan that allows for healing and for trust to build back up. I mean, we should just acknowledge the fact that we have a deficit in that regard at the moment, and this plan is going to make it so people feel comfortable collaborating with each other. They're not going to wonder who's making more than somebody else. And I think at least for the foreseeable future, this is the direction that I think we need to go. So I think you're doing good work, and I think you're on the right track.
Frank?
Scott, I share your concerns about identifying and rewarding excellence. And this is something I raised the last time we had this discussion. What I've come around to on this is, I think, three things. First, that currently we don't know how to do it in a way that's meaningful. Secondly, that a search for finding that is going to significantly delay a process that needs more than anything else finality. And thirdly, that I was very happy to see the inclusion of the PIP issue in this presentation, because I think that at least allows everybody to make the basic cut between who's performing up to standards and who's not. And while I would like to see us be able to, be more specific about, figuring out who's doing the absolute best job and rewarding them appropriately, we're not there. I don't think we're going to be able to get there certainly not this year. And an attempt to get there is going to delay a process that badly needs to be concluded. So I don't agree with you, Joe, that this is a great plan. I think we're on the track to a good enough plan, and for me that's a compliment. So please don't read that as running down your efforts. Yeah, no, I mean there is no perfect plan, and if we were able to devise the perfect plan, we would all be off on our yachts somewhere, living off the proceeds of having done it. So I think you all are doing really good work in trying to reconcile a number of mutually incompatible objectives. I share Scott's concern about continuing to look and to not let that question of how to identify and reward excellence fall off the table altogether, but I don't think it can be an impediment to getting this done. That's where I'm coming from.
Sure. And I guess my response would be, because I won't even be on the board when you all vote on the final version of this.
You keep bringing that up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I do have a microphone now, so. To your point, if we're going to kick down the road the can of how we reward excellence as opposed to acceptable, then I think you need to figure out a mechanism for how that's going to happen. Maybe a different committee, but I think you want to have a deadline too. And I'm concerned that if a taxpayer comes up to any of us and this is accepted and says, what are you doing to reward excellence? We're not going to have an answer. That's a concern. And I think that should be a concern to anybody who's on a school board, that you want to be able to reward superlative performance. Not just people who aren't on a performance improvement plan. Because I agree, if you're having that much difficulty, that's a training issue, that's something else. But the people who go above and beyond, we want to be able to reward them for that so we can help keep them here and attract and retain other people like them. But this isn't a plan that's able to do that. So I thank you for the efforts you've made. I know it's been a really, really long journey, and we're not done yet. And I do appreciate the efforts of everybody who's been on that committee. I know some people have been on it close to 2 years.
Or
Well, right, yeah, that's true. If you go back to the first iteration, yes, that's right. I was just thinking about the modifying committee. But I do think that issue of rewarding performance, that is something that we have got to have an answer for, and to just put it off the road, put it off indefinitely, I think is a mistake. So, thank you.
Comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think as part of that process, I agree. I think part of that process needs to be to define what exactly that looks like and how we're measuring it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I hear that a lot. We want to reward excellence, but what's excellence to one person might be excellence to a different. And so I would welcome the folks of the community that you speak of, because I've not heard from them. I would welcome their input on what that looks like. If that's what they're adamant about rewarding excellence, I want to know what that looks like. Because I've been in education 22 years, and I'm uncertain. Because everybody has different ideas of what that is. And so I do agree with you. I look forward to that conversation and would encourage those in the community where that's an issue or a concern to come to the table and let us know what that is. Because I still lost with me a little bit. So thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Allison?
One thing I would think of when we're talking about what we would say to taxpayers that say, how are you rewarding excellence? And I agree, this doesn't really do that. But I would say that it has been a concern with the current compensation plan that we have right now, that there probably are a lot of really good staff members that I think we have lost. And I have heard from some of them after they have left. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. They were good folks, and I think having something that's not going to chase people away is also helpful. Now, of course, if you can't, get a merit increase because you feel you're doing a really awesome job, and maybe you probably really are, that might also push people away. But I think we do have to look at the current plan as potentially having caused us some losses, which as a taxpayer, that is also important.
Along those lines, about 40% of our teachers were hired under the current plan. So you've got to consider how those folks are going to be impacted as well. We hired them under one understanding, and now we're apparently going to come up with something that's very, very different. Go ahead, Steve.
We've also heard from potential candidates that they're not coming here because we don't have a plan that's understandable. So the 40% that are here, maybe, there's both sides of this. So it's not just
I didn't say it was easy.
No.
Any other questions or comments, folks? Discussion. Okay, well, thank you very much. All right, next up, the school safety resolution.
President Dirks, I would make a motion to suspend the rules and move this item to discussion action so that we could actually vote on this resolution. I'm concerned that because tomorrow is a special session where they will be discussing school safety legislation, I would like to be able to mail that or send this to our legislators. So I'm making that motion.
Is there a second to move this to a discussion action item? Steve? No. Okay. Any discussion on moving this to a discussion action item? Frank?
Are we able to do that if it hasn't been noticed?
Yeah, because it's suspending the rules to make it further down the agenda. You can do that under parliamentary procedure.
Okay, thank you.
But that's a good question. Just by way of clarification, we normally do things in a two-step process before we make a decision on something. There is no board policy that requires we do so. And there have been rare instances where we've had to, because of a calendar issue, like a policy that had to get adopted by the end of the month or something like that. I think one could argue that this sort of falls under that category since the hearing is tomorrow and we couldn't have a meeting until tonight. Any other questions, discussion about moving this to an actionable item tonight? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and then we will move that then down to the foot of the agenda. So next up, staffing recommendations.
Thanks, Scott. And I know this is an emotional issue, and I appreciate the comments that everybody has made and the feedback that people have given us. And I understand where people are coming from. And so the administrative team will come up, and after I go through a little bit of background stuff, I'll open up. If there's questions, you can ask the entire administrative team and the different people. So staffing is something that we spend a lot of time discussing. It's not something we take lightly. It's not something that's easy. And one of the things that has been somewhat of a mandate from the district since I've been here is that we avoid layoffs at all costs. In fact, I don't think we've laid off in over a decade, if not longer. We have not done any layoffs. Even when we closed an elementary school, the district was able to do it without layoffs. Which means that any time we have a resignation or a retirement, we look and we scrutinize the position to see how we can use the FTE, how we can use it to meet the needs of our students. And when we look at staffing and our conversations of staffing revolve around, we look at the needs of the students. We look at enrollment. Are we, projected to increase, decrease? We're unfortunately decreasing environment. We look at class size because we want to follow our class size policies and guidelines. And we do look at budget in one sort or the other because we don't have an unlimited amount of money. While we are okay financially right now, those of you that are on the finance committee and have seen it, you know that we're facing a budget deficit in a couple years. And so we also need to have in the back of our mind that cognizant. And these discussions have led to increases and decreases throughout the last 8 years. So over the last 8 years, we've added, in spite of declining enrollment, we've added 3 social workers to the district. We've added an SRO. We're working with the building bridges staff and contracting with them to meet some of our mental health needs. We've added educational assistants as well. And when I first got to the district, our model at the elementary was we had a principal and a full-time school psych, and we had a school counselor who was shared amongst the 3 buildings. And so those of you that are on the board, or if you're aware, 2 years ago, our recommendation, and we added additional school counseling so that we have a full-time school counselor in every building. And then last year, our recommendation was to add a learning strategist at every elementary building because we felt we needed a learning strategist to help meet the needs of our students. So we look at what the needs are, and we have made recommendations to add staff throughout the years. This year, in conversations with the administrative team and the principals, we looked at recommending adding some positions. And the first ones on your list is a dean of students at the elementary schools. Right now, we operate under what we call crisis teams. And I hate to use the word crisis because when a student is having a bad day or an issue, it's not always a crisis. And sometimes we seem to forget, and sometimes in this day and age, we lump behavior and mental health and trauma. Not every behavioral incident is because of mental health or trauma needs, but we seem to lump those all in. So we have what are called crisis response teams if a student is struggling. It's pretty much whoever's available from this team responds. So that could be the principal responding, that could be the school psych, that could be a counselor, it could be a learning strategist, it could be somebody else. And sometimes this leads to inconsistencies, where we might have a little kiddo that has on Monday and Tuesday and maybe Thursday an incident, and you have a different person responding each day. And so there's not that consistency of who's responding because who's available. Likewise, you may have a student who has multiple incidences in the same day, and it may not be the same person who's available to respond in the same day. So that leads to some inconsistencies. So one of the recommendations for a dean of students is to have this consistent person, realizing that there'll be some times where they're not available and somebody else is going to have to respond, but you have this consistent person who's going to be the front line, who's going to be the one that's going to be responding. So there's a consistency of building that relationship with those students, building so that the same person consistently is or trying to be the first one to respond. Freeing up, principal freeing up the guy or the school counselor and the school psych from being on call and responding to some of this crisis to use their training in the needs that we have. And so I'll speak of the principal, for example. If the principal is not responding to the crisis, etc., or not needed to be on call all the time, it gives them more time to be in classrooms. It gives them more time to work with staff academically, working with staff to help behavioral and social emotional needs in their classroom. It also gives them time to work on their evaluations. Right now, with the number of evaluations and educator effectiveness and the time it takes for each evaluations, our elementary principals are struggling to keep up and are struggling to do all the evaluations that they need to do. And we've had other administrators throughout the district help them out when needed and when we can, but it's still it's a little bit different if somebody from the outside is coming in to evaluate than your principal or your immediate supervisor. Dean of Students is not an administrator. It is not somebody who is certified as an administrator that can do evaluations. It is a Dean of Students working with students. They are not supervising teachers. They are not doing evaluations of teachers. They would be used to, again, as I said, build relationships, to free up other staff and support staff to do the critical jobs that they need to do, to focus on PBIS and be our lead in the 3 elementary in PBIS, and to implement restorative practices and to go down that road with our behavioral support. So that is some of the rationale behind the recommendation for a dean of students. The other increases that you see on the staffing recommendation is art at the high school. We currently have a part-time. We have, Mike, 2 full-time, 1 part-time? Right. Okay. 2 full-time and 1 part-time art staff at the high school. We have more students that are signing up for art, so we need to increase, the recommendation is to increase the part-time by 0.2 so we can offer more art classes to our students who are electing art. And then the last one is a transitional service educational assistant. If you remember in January, I believe it was, we talked about adding a learning strategist at the middle school with the understanding and the goal was to take some of our students who are being sent to more outside facilitated programs like Richardson and meet their needs in-house, and then smoothing their transition back, because our ultimate goal is to transition them back into the regular setting or as much of a regular setting as we can. And sending them to Richardson's or some other school not only is costly, but it's really hard to transition them back. It's really hard to go from there, from 0 to 60 and 60 back to 0 or whatnot or in between. And so the EA is a recommendation to help support that program. And so that's where the EA came from. So those are the increases, which brings me then to the recommended decreases in our staffing. The first one is an interpreter. This position has been vacant all year because we had a student move out last year who needed an interpreter. So we did not hire the position at the beginning of the year because we no longer needed that staffing. So that position has been vacant all year. And so the recommendation is to eliminate that FTE. The next you see on there is just a dollar amount. We believe that we can save $120,000 by taking some of our students who we are sending to Richardson's and other places and bring those services in-house. Now, we kept back some money from what we're spending on that in case there are some extreme students that we do have to send to a Richardson or someplace else to best meet their needs. But we believe with the number of students we could bring back and house in-house, we could see $120,000 savings there. The next one is one that you've heard quite a bit about, and you've heard from people that are very eloquently talked about their concerns and their fears, and that's the school psychologist. First of all, I think there's some misconception that the recommendation is to get rid of all school psychologists. That's farthest from the truth. They're valuable in our staffing, and we need them. Nor is there a plan to continue to get rid of them. We need our school psychologists to focus and work on our evaluations of, as somebody said, of our students, in part our special needs students, and to continue to support our students with significant mental health needs. You may have heard through the year or years talking about Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 interventions. Tier 1 interventions are in the classroom. It's the student in the classroom, and how do we meet those needs right in the classroom through differentiation or other needs. Tier 2 also takes place in the classroom, but it's bringing in additional support for the students so they stay in the classroom to meet their needs. Tier 3 are even further interventions outside the classrooms, and we need our school psychologists, we need our school counselors, we need our staff, especially with our Tier 3 students. We also need our school psychologists to work with our building teams and help support them in meeting the social and emotional needs through collaboration, through training. We're transitioning from a model where we had an expert who was the only person to go to working on training our staff, so we have many people that are trained or have some knowledge on how to do initial interventions and how to do proactively. So with all those conversations and with the suggestion or the recommendation of adding the Dean of Students, when we had a retirement of a school psychologist, the administrative team looked and believes that we can still meet the needs of the students by reducing that school psychologist and going 3. And like I said, I'll bring the administrative team up and you can ask them questions on their feelings. And the last was the reading specialist. Right now at River Bluff, we have actually 4 reading specialists. This is the first year we've had 4, before we had 3. This year we added a 4th who is working individually with small groups of students. We know through our research, and we know that working in those small pullout is not the most effective model to make the gains. So with a retirement of a reading specialist at River Bluff, we would have a reading specialist at every elementary, or excuse me, at every grade level to push in to work into the classrooms, to work with larger groups, to help train, I shouldn't say train, to help work collaboratively with the teachers so we can meet the needs of our students in that setting instead of pulling, say, 5 students out where they are reading something differently and they're not reading with their peers. That is somewhat of a stigma. When I'm being pulled for reading and I'm reading something else and all my peers are in the classroom, we can differentiate and meet the needs and meet the level of our students in the classroom with support. And that was why the recommendation, and we're seeing gains with doing that model. That's why the recommendation was for the elimination of a reading specialist, so services provided by reading teachers at the River Bluff. So I'll bring the administrative team up if they want to come up, so that you can ask them questions that you may have, of their thoughts, of rationale, etc. But that's the background of the recommendation, and they're here to answer any questions you have.
Okay, so questions?
I just clarify a question. So how many school psychologists will there be servicing the 3 elementary schools?
There would be 3 school psychologists servicing the district.
Well, so how many are going to be assigned just to the elementary schools?
2.
So you have 2 that are just servicing the elementary schools?
They'll be servicing, one will be servicing elementary and part middle.
And how is the allocation of that time going to be determined, given this is a position that's often slave to the urgency?
Kelly, I'll let you answer that one.
Based on student need. So wherever there's student need, that's the percentage that it would be allocated.
Okay, and how is that going to be determined? I guess what I'm saying is if you have a person going from building to building and you're allocating to that building based on student need, that student need is going to be constantly shifting, I would guess. But my experience is it's going to be shifting because there's...
It can be, yes. I mean, there's some buildings that have less kids with special needs, and that can kind of stay static through the year. So it does fluctuate, so I'm going to be completely honest with you there.
The idea is that we can be responsive to, and that flexibility. So we could have 50% at 2 elementary schools, and there could be some ability to be flexible and responsive to student needs.
Frank?
I think my question is a lot more, is a really basic question, but I'm still trying to get a handle on exactly what the school psychologists are doing now. My understanding from Dr. Onsager's presentation is that there are some duties that the school psychologists are currently handling that would be transitioned to the Dean of Students position. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and can you explain for me using small words what those would be and why a Dean of Students is more appropriate to handle those than a psychologist?
A lot of times it's for those kids in crisis behaviorally at any given time. So it might not be a mental health issue. They may be having a hard day. So it's hard to explain. So
could you use maybe a specific example that helps me a lot?
Okay.
I can give an example.
Okay, and
I will have you.
too.
Thank you.
We had a little bug today that was really struggling throughout the day. In and out of class, really struggling staying in class. that required school psychologist time, counselor time, my time, learning strategist time throughout the day to be able to support this child as they kind of ebbed and flowed in crisis. Part of the concern is we spend a lot of time in that reactive piece. We have some really good proactive systems, but often I'm not able to be able to advance that work, that proactive work. Our school counselors pull from classes, our school psychologists pull from classes. So it's a way for those immediate response for us to have somebody that really is able to attend to behavioral concerns that arise throughout the day. One incident, a behavioral incident, can take hours to be able to work with. You have to call families, you're processing the students, and all of that is important work, but it takes away from a lot of that proactive work. So some of it is like taking school psychologists and counselors off that immediate crisis response team. That isn't to say that there aren't times when everyone will respond because there's that need, but it's really having somebody that consistently can respond to behavior as it pops up through the day, and also has that, like when kids come in the building, they're looking for how are kids doing, what do they need, and being able to do some of those really proactive supports. Like I can tell Tim, I'll pick on him, it's like he's having kind of a rough day. I'm going to start my day in second grade. Be able to sit with him and put into some of those supports. So part of this whole plan is to be able to give back time to all of us that are working really hard to be able to do those really important proactive work and that small group counseling.
And so that's super helpful to help me understand where we're going here. Is part of the training or the skill set of the Dean of Students to take the example of the child you were talking about before and say, all right, this is a mental health issue, this is something that we move over to the psychologist, this is something that we move to the counselor. So tell me what it is about, I don't know how to ask this question, how does the Dean of Students know
So
that?
I think one of the, I'm sorry, I'll just tell you. So I think
They all took a step back. So you're on your own.
I think one of the concerns, one of the misreads of this, and I think we have this traditional idea of the Dean of Students. The Dean of Students comes in, gives detention, takes care of business, right? Like when we think about it, at least I do, I go back, what's the role of Dean of Students? I think what we're really looking for is another person, and what we're trying to build in this district is, it's not, we don't believe in it. I don't believe in an expert model. I believe that all of us play a role. Like we have school psychologists that play a really critical role. We have school counselors that play a really important role, Dean of Students, and having people trained across the board, from educational assistants, custodians, all the way up in trauma-informed work, in ACEs, in collaborative problem solving. Like I think we feel pretty strongly that the people doing this, we need more people with a depth of skill to be able to meet the needs of our kids, because we know that all behavior serves a function, that they're communicating something. And so it's another way of adding another layer to really support our kids. This is about helping our kids.
Joe?
Nothing.
Oh, sorry.
I agree, but we're taking a layer away then. So, I mean, for me, the perfect thing would be to add 3 deans of students without taking away any school psychology, because I can empathize with you with that. But if it's going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, I'm struggling with what role the dean of students is going to play that the school psychologist isn't already doing. I'm struggling with how we're going to be improving mental health services to students, but cutting a school psychologist. It's counterintuitive to me. And that's why this is a struggle for me. I don't know of a lot of elementary schools out there that have a dean of students, and maybe you've looked at some, but the ones that I've had experiences with don't. They have a full-time school psychologist, they have a full-time school counselor, they have a full-time school social worker, and they address a lot of the things that you're addressing. That's not to say that I'm completely opposed to this. I would like us to look at ways to add both. I don't know if that's possible, because I do empathize with you, and I am a proponent of. I do sometimes think we need folks on staff to handle discipline, the punitive kind. That's not always popular, I understand that, but I think kids have to learn that. But I'm not for doing that by cutting mental health services in this way.
It is time consuming because there's a crisis and you have to wait till that student can calm down enough to process through that crisis. So it's not just that once, supporting that student and done. You're probably coming back later and spending a good amount of time in that problem solving.
One of the things I heard Dr. Onsinger say was a consistent person to be on the front line. Wouldn't you want the person that knows that student the best, that has a background in counseling, to be that person, even if it is in crisis mode? I mean, that just seems, they have the expertise to address that. I mean, and again, I'm speaking from my experience. And the school psychologist has always been the person, from my experience, that is most equipped to handle those kinds of things. The dean of students is the most equipped to be the bad guy, so to speak.
But I think we have to shift that thinking. Like,
Well,
it doesn't have to be, right? Like,
But
it
then
doesn't
why
have to be.
don't we then keep the school psychologist then? What?
Part of our issue is we're having, I mean, I can speak for my day. Like, I can speak for my day. I got nothing done. And it's just another day of like, and it's true, it's responding to crises, responding to behavior. It takes hours, I mean, you know this, like to be able
I didn't have a dean of students.
respond. And we're just looking for creative ways to be able to support the needs of our kids.
Have we looked at adding both? Well, I mean, is there any options around there, how we can support this without?
There are options. I mean,
Okay.
there are options to do this. Part of this is a staffing recommendation. And so I think one of the misnomers that's out there is this is our staffing plan. This is a recommendation. This is why we have the discussion. This is why we go to a two-step process. If the board is okay with us going into, and we've done it in the past, adding staff and keep adding expenses, yeah, we have the resources right now. But as I said, the last thing we look at is ultimately in the back of our mind is we can't keep sustaining just adding staff and adding staff and adding staff. At some point, we will get to this point where we can't afford to add staff anymore. We can now, and so financially, if you're gonna ask me if we could find the resources to do both, yes, we could find the resources to do both. But again, this is why we have the discussion. This is why we have a discussion on staffing, and it's not a one step, or it's not just me coming to saying, this is our staffing for next year.
And Tim, I want to, go on what Erin had said about, there's a wide variety of experts, and psychologists are very expert in a lot of things as well, but I have also seen people who are not psychologists being able to develop that relationship with the student, to model some approaches to stabilize students. So I've observed that with both psychologists and other staff who might be special educators or learning strategists. I've seen it with counselors. I've seen it with other people, principals. So it really is about building that capacity of all, and not just defining based on one role. It's a lot for a psychologist to handle in a day then, because then they also have to do their evaluations and monitor tier 3 interventions on the whole for response to intervention paperwork and evaluations and LEA. So that's part of the reasoning behind this too, is to relieve some of that crisis when we have other talented people.
And
that can do this
a
work.
dean of students is not going to be a brand-new educator.
No.
You don't put a brand-new educator into that role because they do not have some of the experience and things like that. So part of the thought in our discussion is we potentially have some people in the system who are very good at different roles, who might be interested in a position like that.
And it's not a unique role to elementary schools, like Oregon, McFarland, Monona, where else? There's lots of school districts that are saying that there needs to be an extra layer of support for our kids, so.
So Joe and then
Yeah, I have an enormous list of questions, but I'm not going to get to them all. I want to talk about IEPs and how the reduction of a school psych is going to affect IEPs, because that person, from my experience, I have a son that's on an IEP, is an integral part of that team. And it seems to me when I talk to people that are involved with IEPs that we're barely getting it done with the staff that we have now, legally and getting it done in a way that's meaningful. So how is reducing a school psych going to affect kids with IEPs?
Or the hope is that, or what we're talking about is a lot of that crisis intervention will be taken off their plates, providing them more time to be able to do that work.
But they'll be spending less time directly with those students because they'll be building to building, correct?
No, not necessarily.
it just maybe to clarify that, tell me if I'm wrong. Right now, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that the school psychs who have the primary responsibility for the IEPs.
Not always either.
Learning strategists.
Yeah.
The learning strategists.
But I mean, they're the ones that have to do the testing and so forth, right?
For the initial evaluations and reevaluations.
Right, so there are things
so
that
not the
only the
annual
school psychs
IEPs.
can do, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But they're also being pulled into things that other people could do.
Yes.
And by having deans of students at the elementaries, that would allow them then to spend more of their time on the stuff that only they can do. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. Does that
Well,
make any
that-
sense to you?
Kind of. My other concern is about the dean of students position just in general, because as a board, it's tended to be our approach that we like to have a lot of data. I don't have any data about what effect deans of students have as far as bending the curve. Now, school psychs we have, it's a known quantity. We're hearing from a ton of people how important they are. We're talking about eliminating that person, who people seem to agree pretty broadly has an awful lot of value, and replacing them with another person on whom I have no data. So I guess my sort of sense right now is that if we want to add a dean of students, I don't know that we need to talk about doing it this year. We need to take a pretty deep dive into, is that the appropriate thing for this district to do? And if it is, we can do it in a year. And I would, if we want to do it, then I'm basically where Tim's at. I want to do that and keep the school site.
A couple of thoughts. The dean of students is actually more expensive than a school psych.
Right.
So what I'm wondering, why don't we just hire more school psychs?
Yeah.
I mean, and I also, it appears to me that perhaps our school psychs aren't being used consistently the same way from site to site. And so it almost seems like we need some time to evaluate how our model is actually working. Maybe we need to pull in some extra, and I get you need extra help, but maybe some people that, maybe we've got some schools that are doing it really well. Maybe we have some schools that are still kind of struggling. Let's figure out what's working and then try to deploy that across our district first, or at least get a little extra help. I'm really concerned at the high school about not having a psych there. I mean, I regularly talk to counselors there, and they, I mean, every year it's always, this is the worst year yet. Again, this is the worst year yet. And not having someone there that can deal with that, you know, those moments where they're in crisis, I feel like the counselors are kind of tapped as it is, and I'm concerned that not filling that role is going to be even a bigger problem. I have a problem with people traveling. You talk to any teacher that's doing that traveling, it's hard. And I think we're going to have, I mean, what's going to suffer are the kids, because they're, you know, spending time driving back and forth. Sure, you get paid for it, you get extra for it, but I don't know. And I'm not saying that your idea, I applaud you trying to figure out something outside of the box. I just feel like we maybe need to look inside and say, what could we do to make it work better? Maybe the staff you have some ideas. And maybe we just need to hire a couple extra support people in that, you know, with the, I mean, I don't know where you came up with 93, but I guess that's just what you'd be willing to pay a dean of students. But I don't know if they would have that behavioral background that a school psych would have. And to me, it seems like you get more bang for your buck by trying to find more school psychs.
You'll.
I was going to point out the same thing that Donna pointed about the money for the dean of students versus the psychologist. I also, by looking at the job functions of the psychologist, and just reading this, and of course the psychologist doesn't have here the job of helping out with crisis. So this is a lot for a psychologist. And I feel like this is something that the dean of students won't be able to do. And I totally, and Erin, yes, I've seen it. I know that our school needs the support of somebody that is there that doesn't take away these things that the psychologist needs to be doing, or you have to be doing, other teachers have to be doing. So I'm saying, as Tim said, if we need, or Donna, if we need more support, and we can afford that support, let's do that. But I don't see that reducing the psychologist position is gonna be helping. And I'm just thinking about psychologists moving from one school to the other and doing all this at the same time. So I don't know, Trish, how you feel about, like, not, because I think River Bluff is the only one who doesn't have a full-time psychologist, and I totally think that we need one there. And I totally think we need a full-time psychologist there. So I'd rather have that if I have to choose, but if we can afford having the dean of students or support of somehow, plus the full-time psychologist, I'll rather do that.
Allison?
And again, I appreciate y'all thinking, you know, trying to think of a way to handle the situation. I can't imagine, you know, I get how it is when you can't get anything done. It's hard. I guess my concerns are similar to other things that have been voiced. And one of the things I'm wondering is if, like Donna said, it's less expensive to get more psychologists. What if we have it that it's the dean of students that is shared between the buildings and we have more psychologists?
Correct.
Then we still have both, and it might be more cost effective and better for our kids.
Frank?
Respond or?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So part of the issue that I heard from the administrative team was the idea of a consistent response, that when there's a crisis, it's always Joe or Mary that shows up as the first line. And that the value of having the dean of students, and if I'm putting words in your mouth that shouldn't be there, please correct me, but that the value of having these positions in the elementary school is that you have a tasked first responder who's doing the triage. And the danger of having the psychologist be that person is sort of the issue that Joe had pointed out, is that the psychologist has many other duties in addition to being that first responder. And being if it's important to have a consistent first responder, which is what I'm hearing from you all, that it is, and then we should have a consistent first responder. And if that person's a psychologist, what concerns me is that the other things that only the psychologist can do, like the IEPs, for example, that the psychologist has to do, aren't going to get done because that person's day is going to be driven by crisis. And I've seen this oddly in a completely different professional setting in one of my client agencies, and it's a real struggle for them to say, okay, we have psychologists, we're going to reserve them only for things that psychologists can do. We're going to use other lower level staff to do the more immediate crisis intervention. I was also somewhat befuddled by why a dean of students costs more than a psychologist. But the value I see in this is having a designated crisis responder in each building that is specifically not a psychologist.
I guess.
Yep.
And that makes sense, but I'm wondering what, in the qualifications of a dean of students, because we don't really have that. I mean, I guess there's a little bit here, but I really am concerned because we have talked so much about trauma-informed care and nurtured heart. All of that is focusing on mental health and reaching out to kids and their behaviors and their crises being related to something that has happened to them. I am concerned about what the dean of students has as qualifications, and maybe it's there, I just don't know what that is, how they're going to know what to do.
Before we do that, you were going to respond to the costing issue, right?
Yeah, I was just
Can we do that first, please?
Yeah, and it's, there was no like rocket science put into that. When we have looked at critical staffing, we've always kind of looked at an average cost of a teacher's salary plus benefits, and we've fallen on that $75,000 amount for the last couple of years. When we looked at the dean of students position, we just wanted to be conscientious because it was a new role that we haven't had before. And what I learned is that oftentimes people that might be looking into this kind of a position is sort of a step prior to doing possibly an administrative role. So we didn't know if the pay associated with that would be higher or not. Again, that goes back to the hiring process and, all the things that go into determining somebody's starting salary and benefits, but we just didn't want to underestimate. So that's why we plugged in initially a higher salary amount for an average. Again, that's just a target figure or an estimate.
So to Allison's question, can someone respond to that?
For the nurtured, when you're talking about the nurtured heart especially, I mean, our two trainers in the district are not psychologists. They are trained for nurtured heart, and they have provided all the professional development, and now they're actually working in some schools coaching for that implementation, modeling to what that looks like. So, and so I think that's the blurred lines that we get, that a lot of times our other staff that are trained for some of these strategies, responsive classroom, we've had all teachers trained for responsive classrooms, which is a recommendation for that tier 1 or that universal level to respond for our kids that have had trauma. So it's building capacity and keeping that capacity going, but nurtured heart is not something that our psychologists are necessarily training at all. Our trainers are our inclusion support teachers right now.
Joe? And on page 6 of my agenda notes is a draft job description for dean of students, which includes, if you scroll down, some qualifications that we were looking at and some other things.
Yeah, and I mean, when It's not, I guess it's not helping me a lot to understand how that's gonna work, is all.
Yeah, Joe, you had your hand up?
Yeah, and I just had a follow-up question for Erica. You mentioned that the Dean of Students often seems to be sort of a step toward an administrative position. Is that accurate?
Not necessarily, I just heard, I mean, again, as we were processing and learning and looking at, you know, how do we figure out a cost, that what I learned is that it's not uncommon for someone that might be interested in pursuing an administrative role to take or look at some of these kinds of positions. Again, what we're hearing tonight is that this is not an administrative position. It would have different responsibilities than what a building administrator has. But again, just looking at those data pieces from a cost perspective, we just didn't want to underestimate.
No, and I understand all that, but I guess I'd like to see some data about whether it's true that people take this job and then move into administrative roles, because if that's the case, this will not be a consistent person for a very long time. I mean, they would keep this role for a couple of years and we'd get another one, and, you know, I mean, the kid's gonna be at the elementary school for 6 years. So it's not gonna be necessarily a very consistent position, which would be a concern for me, so I'd like to see, if we can, some data on whether that tends to occur.
Steve?
Yeah,
I
a
don't know
couple
if that's
things.
possible.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just, it's a concern.
Couple things I just wanted to touch on, and one was the Building Bridges program, which I think is a positive, however, it's temporary, right? Or it's not a permanent program, correct?
It's every year it renews, yes.
But,
So yes, we
but
will.
it's based on a funding mechanism that may or may not be present 3 years out, or,
At this point in time, Dane County has given us no indication
Okay.
that program is going to
Okay.
be defunct. Joe Parisi, right,
Okay.
is very invested in the program and keeping on building.
Okay.
So, and they are getting more funding to be able to reimbursement from Medicare. So that's decreasing the cost of the program for everybody.
So one of the things, and I understand the workload issue on the principals, but I'm curious how the staffing changes that are being recommended affect some of the things that were shared December 4th when we had our board meeting, and we talked about the report card results, and we talked about the next improvement actions. And every school's doing something different. And I'm wondering how the staffing, so this is one of my concerns, is like everybody's implementing something on a different time frame or maybe a different program, and how we can do something that's more consistent in our planning across schools, like all the elementary schools. So for example, Fox talked about the reading specialists included in the weekly meetings. Focus on responsive classroom and compassionate schools in order to meet the social-emotional needs of students. Kiganza, focus on coherent instruction and assessment, behavioral systems, social-emotional learning, etc., that will increase our reading and math achievement. Sandhill, continue to design and implement individual student resiliency plans for the kids with the greatest need for trauma sensitive support. River Bluff, beginning to implement universal design for learning. So everybody's, and now maybe some of these programs are consistent, but I can't tell. I'm not an educator. What do the staffing, how will the staffing changes affect these programs, one, and number two, can we get consistency so that we're doing things across the district more consistent and avoid some of these conflicts if I can't get things done because we're always implementing something different and new in different stages?
I wouldn't say that, I haven't heard that the argument is that we can't get things done because we're not, like, we're rolling out new initiatives. I think there's like a great deal of consistency across the levels in terms of we have intensive work around building coherence and our instructional alignment, like across the K-12. We are also looking to build and fortify our social emotional learning. Like those are consistent drops. Like at the elementary, we're looking looking at responsive classrooms and really implementing that well with the universal tier. We're implementing zones of regulation. Like all of those pieces are coherent across, and I think the question is a worthy one. And really, the purpose of this staffing recommendation is we're trying to identify ways that we can better support our schools so everybody can do the best work. And that really, I think it's important to assume that outcome. We're trying to do good things for kids. This is one way that we propose to be able to do that. But I would like to be able to be in classes more often. I would like to be able to co-teach and work with classroom teachers, and I know all of us would be, because that's powerful learning. I would like our school counselors and school psychologists to be able to deliver lessons without responding to behavior calls. Those are pieces that are really important. Sadly, we are in a district that has declining enrollment. We have to be aware of the budget, and so if you guys could make money rain, we would like that. So, but that's really, and that's the piece that I think not speaking for them, but personally, really taken aback by is we're a lot of really good people trying to do our best work. And I think it's about having a conversation about how to do that and assuming positive intentions as we move forward to a solution.
And I would like to speak to the continuity of how staffing changes can influence student achievement. And I really think it's about getting our instructional leaders, our building principals, in working with teachers routinely and consistently, and they know the consistent curriculums that we have adopted and implemented, but don't have opportunity to be routinely, consistently, guaranteedly involved in that work. And so I believe that this can influence the kind of time they can spend as instructional leaders engaged with classroom teachers, with learning strategists, so that so there is more continuity maybe there. It doesn't say that it will cure situations that our children are coming to school with, but if the one that Erin helped on and off all day today, if there was a consistent voice that routinely helped that child in those situations, then Erin could be more involved in the curriculum piece.
And really a principal is a coach. They have that coaching, reflecting practice to help move practice forward. And there's tons of research on how much more things, or initiatives, curriculum, implementation is effectively implemented by teachers through coaching and reflection. And you can look up Joyce and Showers. They've been doing research on coaching since the 1980s, and it's key in supporting our staff. We don't want them they're working hard, and our job is also to support them in that hard work.
You all hear the question?
Yeah, I hear it, and I appreciate. I know you are very professional, and I know that you're working hard on this. And since, like Tim said, this is a discussion, I believe this is like a brainstorming session, right? I kept hearing since a while ago, and I've seen it, the behavior problem that we have, and we are not the only district, of course. And not only from staff, but also from the community. From parents very, worry about what's happening in the classroom, and many people don't know about the tier 1, 2, and 3, and that had, brought some other complainants. So I would like to propose to look for, let me go back. Kelly, I heard you saying these are things that can be teach to someone and prepare someone, train someone to respond to this crisis. So I don't know if our only alternative is the dean of the students, or can we bring support staff to the district that not necessarily cost that amount of money as the dean of students, and that is gonna support psychologists and all the team, you know. So this is what I'm proposing, to look into
Like a
preparing,
peer educational assistant?
or something like that, yeah, I don't know the name for that, but and that is gonna be first responder, and it's gonna be consistent, and that will solve, I think, problem run, but part of that problem. But having a school psychologist in every school and trying to get a support staff that is gonna work only for those crises.
Sure, go ahead, Frank.
There are, first I want to thank everybody, my colleagues on the board, y'all, Tim, and everybody who came out tonight or emailed or called or Facebooked or provided input to get this discussion started. There are a couple basic questions that I think I need to have answered before I can formulate a meaningful opinion on this recommendation. The first is I need to understand better what sort of person, what sort of training the Dean of Students is. Who is this? If we go and buy one off the rack and take it out of the box and put the batteries in, what does it do? And what does it, what capabilities does this person have? What trainings do they have? And what will they be doing with their time? The second question, or I guess the connected questions go with that for me, is how do our school psychologists use their time now? And I think what I'm specifically interested in is the question that the folks over here sort of put together, is how much of what they're doing is psychologist stuff that only psychologists can do, and how much of it is stuff that other staff with appropriate training could be doing, but they are doing it instead. And then the third question is, assuming we implement this policy, assuming we do this, how will the psychologists be using their time instead and where? And that goes, I think, to Joe's concern about the role that the psychologists play in IEPs, and the sense that those of us who have kids with IEPs feel that they're getting overwhelmed now. And my assumption, without having thought about that very much up to this point, was it was because we didn't have enough psychologists. But the answer may be that we do have enough psychologists, but they're being asked to do things that other people could do. And I don't know the answer to any of those things. So that's, to the extent that those are answerable questions, I would find them extraordinarily helpful as we continue to go forward with this discussion. So. Hang on.
I can answer the first one. I would say that we're looking for, in terms of the hiring, is really the,
That's more important. Come back.
I mean, I think we're looking for somebody that has an understanding, a deep understanding of special education, of somebody that has training in trauma-informed practice, somebody that has been trained or interested in being trained in nurtured heart, somebody that also, lots of people walk around and say that they're trained in collaborative problem solving, but they're not. Call that a spade a spade. But people that have a deep interest in behavior and really looking at collaborative problem solving as one model to be able to do that. I don't believe that any of us are static in our learning, so I believe it's hiring the right person that has it. It's also, that's a hard job, right? It's like full-time, often kids that aren't super happy with you. So somebody that has an internal resilience and really a passion for working with kids that might be disengaged in school, that have backgrounds in trauma, and can be, I think you said it well, that first line of defense, so that in order to, for school psychologists and school counselors and learning strategists to be able to do that deep work with them. When I worked in the Madison schools, there was always like a lot of discussion too around how we don't want our school psychologists and school counselors wearing like red vests and doing playground duty all day. Like we want them doing what they're trained to be doing. They're highly trained professionals and we want them to be able to do that work. So the intention behind this is to be able to bring in other people that might be able to do that first line of defense, build those relationships with kids, communicate with teachers, sit in classrooms throughout the day in order to give psychologists and counselors and other educators in the building an opportunity to do the work that you're hired to do.
Did one of you also have a response for Frank?
I wrote the questions down.
Okay, so you're gonna come back? Is that the plan? Okay.
It seems like it might be handy. I mean, they're really good questions, so
Mhm.
maybe like trying to be concise.
Yeah,
and-
please.
Yeah.
Okay. Tim?
I'd also like some data on the number of crises we have happening in our schools. Because I've heard that part of the main rationale for this, not the only one, but the main one, and Frank had even mentioned it, was to respond to crises. If we have this many crises in our school where we have to allocate this much money to address it, we have, I think, some bigger issues to talk about, quite frankly. So I would like some data on what that looks like. What's defined as a crisis that takes you as a principal away for so long, or that takes a school psychologist away from being able to do their duties. Because that's concerning to me as a parent. I didn't realize that there were this many crises in our elementary schools where we would need to look at cutting a school psychologist and allocating more to this. So I would love some data on that. That'd be great. Joe?
So I have a question about River Bluff. We have no school psych at River Bluff, is that correct?
We have a consultant that comes in and provides evaluations.
But we don't.
Sorry, Trish can talk more about that and collaboration with our special ed coordinator.
Well, the reason that I'm asking is because that's a heck of an age to not have some mental health support, shall we say. And I'm wondering why it is that we don't, and also would it be more appropriate to think about adding a dean of students if we were to add this position at the middle school rather than at the elementary schools, or at all of those places. I guess I'm just wondering why we don't have that mental health support at the middle school where it seems there would be a very crying need for it.
There is definitely, at the middle level, a crying need for supporting students. I think we all recognize, and those of us that either have kids at River Bluff or have experienced the adolescent at the middle school, we recognize that they have a lot that's going on in their brains and in their relationships and their learning. The answer to your question is last year we had our River Bluff school psychologist, someone that had been with me for a very long time, take an opportunity in a different district. So that left a vacancy. And that vacancy, one of the things that is really, really, really important when we're hiring is the availability of candidates, the quality of candidates is when you're able to go out and do it, which is really why tonight and our conversations is really important. That staff member left at a time when pretty much all the school psychologists, we're not the only district where these are just super high in demand people. I think you've heard that they have fantastic skills that we all need, and this isn't just a Stoughton thing. So given that I couldn't find one, you know, consulted and thought, okay, so what's the next best option? And that was to hire a full-time social worker at River Bluff to help address the different mental health needs as well of students and make those connections between home and school that I think are really vital to the success of our students and students with mental health concerns and trauma. So that is why we went with just doing the consultant piece of just what sort of we call test and assess. So in other words, we have a contracted service to meet the technical definition of what is required through an IEP. So it was really that I couldn't find one.
Okay, well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I can't help it. Do we need to be talking about adding a school site at the middle school?
I think what is, or has been, or will continue to be a challenge is anything that occurs at the elementary schools rolls up. And so one thing that often I think happens at River Bluff is, well, we recognize that there may be an issue at one elementary school, right, and the other, when they all come up to River Bluff, it puts a lot of pressure on the middle. I think we're also well aware that the middle level has a lot of different and unique needs that we may not have at the elementary school, or we certainly might not have at the high school. And as my colleagues reflected on this issue related to what principals are able to do in the work that we know really creates increased academic achievement for all students, without having some level or structure for support, I think it pulls us away from doing that work. What's really exciting at River Bluff is that the staff this year really dug in and worked really hard collaboratively to create increased academic achievement in literacy more than we've ever had before. So I think it's really important to think about the role that you want from your principal. What is that? I mean, there are times, just like at the elementary school, I've responded to crises all day. Having done my job for a very long time, I have a unique set of skills. So I certainly, Joe, wouldn't want to leave out some of the conversation about the middle school in this as a K-8 concern, and I'd be more happy in the future to address that and talk about that as well.
If I could piggyback, it isn't that the service of a school psych isn't needed at the middle school. It is. It's needed at every school. It's what roles do you want the school psych to play? So do you want them to play the role with the IEP, with the assessment, with initial evaluation? Do you want that? Do you want that and a behavioralist, someone that intervenes? So I didn't know if we were getting to quite the answer. Yes, we need that service. We need that service in all of our schools. They're going to try and define for you what part of the role has to be done by a school psychologist and what part of the role may not have to be done by a school psychologist. But they're needed in every building. Does that help?
It does, and you sort of asked me what I wanted from those people. I want all of that stuff. I want the school psych to be doing what the school psych is trained and good at doing, and I want, if we need a dean of students, for them to be doing what their appropriate job function is. And I think, given the feedback that we've gotten and some of the sort of behavior concerns that we've been hearing for, quite a while now, that, we may just need to be very blunt and honest about this and say we need both of these things, and if the money's not there at some point, we may have to go to the community and say, this has made it a whole lot better. Now there's no money. Now we got to talk about it. But if that's going to make a big difference, and the behavior's going to get better, and the mental health is going to get better, then maybe we need them both. My perspective.
I think that, there are a couple of things going on here. We've been hearing for years in the context of various discussions that our principals are not doing a lot of the things that we want principals to do. There's the coaching teachers, there's the evaluations. Evaluation's not related to our own present compensation plan, but to state requirements. And that's in addition to all the other stuff they have to do. They've got to have budgets, they've got to do hiring. And those are things that only a principal can do in a particular building. We're hearing tonight that it sounds like a fair amount of time that our school psychologists are spending a fair amount of their time doing things that other people could be doing or could be trained to do. And I don't think that that's the best, for the status quo is not the best use of our resources right now. And, you know, I get what some people have talked about, that maybe we need both. Maybe we need deans of students as well as more school psychologists. And possibly, I guess I would like everybody to bear in mind that the money really is a factor. Later this spring, we're going to get a presentation from Paul and the people he's working with on school cameras. My recollection is that the number that was ballparked to us the last time we talked about this was in the neighborhood of $200,000. It may end up being a lot more than that. So, you know, and the last time we talked about school cameras, the board sounded pretty supportive of getting those cameras in the school for safety issues. So, I guess what I'm getting at is the money doesn't grow on trees. We do have to, unfortunately, make decisions as to how resources are going to get spent. And that may mean we have to make a decision between dean of students or a school psychologist position. Tonight's not the night to do it. This is a discussion we're having. But I just want people to have that, you know, the school cameras are going to be a big chunk of money. And we need to keep that in mind as part of this as well. So, other questions or comments? Joe?
Yeah, just basically a procedural question on what this is gonna look like in 2 weeks. I mean, are we gonna have a resolution that says we either support this recommendation or we don't, or can we see an option that says more school psychs, or, you know, some of the other options that have been sort of laid out there?
Well, I mean, you could cost it, I guess, and this was kind of unsaid by what Trish was getting at. School psychs aren't necessarily easy to hire either. That could be part of the problem we deal with here. We just may not, even if we authorize the spending, we may not find the people to hire.
Well, we're doing it at the right time, so it shouldn't be as difficult as Trish's example.
Right, hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, right. But I'm just saying, that's a concern. Frank?
When do we need to make a decision on this?
The sooner we can, the better, if to go out and get positions. So if the ultimate decision is to go after a school psych, the sooner we can post that and get to start recruiting, the better. The sooner you get in the game. Those of you on the board, when I got here, remember we used to not post until June.
Yeah.
And we were late in the game. And so you want to post March, April, so that you can get good quality candidates who are looking in the spring.
Right, we've traditionally discussed staffing changes at the board level in March just for that reason.
So it sounds like it would be preferable to make the call at either the next meeting or certainly the meeting after.
Next meeting would be the best.
Okay.
Yeah. Yoli?
I have a question, because you're saying that so whatever decision we're gonna take, it will be between either having a dean of student psychologist, but what I'm hearing here also are different propositions, different ideas. Can we explore different ideas? Or it have to be either these or that?
Well, we can certainly direct the administration to come up with another option for us to consider. I don't think we want to ask for something that's gonna take a whole lot more time to pull together though, because
No.
time is of the essence here.
I agree.
Yeah, Frank?
I think what might be most useful from my perspective is, I've mentioned some of the things that are sort of at the front of my mind as I evaluate this. I think it would be useful to be presented with 2 or 3 options, including cost, to choose from at the next meeting, with answers to the questions that those of us here have raised, to the extent that they can be answered in the time frame we're looking at, and something that is available. I mean, can't take my shoes off. We have a lot of community members here tonight who are deeply concerned about this issue. And so I think part of what we need to do is make sure that what we are considering and the information that we've sort of accumulated and put together is distributed to the community in a way that allows people to review it, evaluate it, and provide us with meaningful public comment either before the meeting via email or during the public comment section at the next meeting. That feels important to me.
Can I ask for clarification on parameters
Of
from the
course.
board? Right now, if you notice, there's a $0 net increase, decrease. I don't want to bring something to the board that has a net increase if the board is not interested in that. And for then you to say that, no, we're not interested in that. And so I'm trying to get my parameters around the proposals. Are we looking for a $0 net increase? Are we looking for a decrease in budget? Is the board comfortable with a net increase? Because I don't want to waste anybody's time of doing proposals if that's not something the board can support or go after. If that makes sense to what I'm asking.
That certainly feels like a fair question.
Well, maybe so we can help the administration have some direction. It sounds from the consensus of discussion I'm getting here, and please jump in, folks, if I've got this wrong. It sounds as though there are basically 2 options we might be interested in exploring. One is this, which we've already talked about some. The other would be an option where we have 1 or 2 more school psychs that we want to hire. Is that more or less what people are getting at here?
So you're talking, and we would look at an option with a net increase.
Well, yeah. Or the third option is you hire school psychs, but you don't hire deans of students.
Those, I think, are the 3 options.
Yeah.
And the net increase, decrease is not as important to me right now.
Well, but I mean, the numbers, the dollars will be driven by those.
I understand.
Those options. Does that make sense to people that we ask them to look into this? Again, we've only got a couple of weeks to do this.
So I'll just say my position is that, yes, I would, like you, I would support you looking into a net increase to help us fund this. That would be my position. I know we have these discussions and sometimes it's hard to leave knowing what that.
Well, we can at least talk about it.
Yeah, I understand that, but.
What do you say to, it will be 1 for River Bluff, we already have.
You have an assistant principal at River Bluff.
No, I'm talking about psychologists. Don't we have full-time psychologists in every school except for River Bluff?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, right.
There's going to be retirement.
So is it a?
And one is retiring, and that's where the vacancy
Oh,
comes
okay,
from.
got it.
Right.
So it's filling the vacancy plus,
So it will be 2.
3 deans of students.
filling the vacancy plus another school psychologist?
Potentially, I think
You
that would
could.
be an option to look at.
That would be an option to look at.
So if I'm hearing correctly, the board is interested in the following options. They're interested in the option we have currently right now. They're interested in the option we currently have right now with the change of taking the school psych off the decrease list. So that would be a net increase of $75,000. They're interested in the net option we have now and not only taking the decrease of the school psych off, but adding another school psych, so that would be a net increase of $150,000, if I'm doing the math off the top of my head. And then they're interested in a fourth option, which is a combination of adding, or maybe a fifth option, combination of adding psychs, but in order, and decreasing the number or eliminating altogether the dean of students.
Right.
Yes.
Am I correct on,
Well done.
on those?
Yeah,
Okay.
right, right. And, you know, Erica, you're gonna have to see, I guess really the question we're gonna have answered is, if we're going to talk about spending another 75, 150, whatever it's going to be, is that even doable?
For next year, yes.
Right, especially considering that we may be authorizing $200,000 to buy school cameras in a very short period of time.
I'd really like to think the school cameras might be part of that safety state legislature.
Possibly not.
Well, that's assuming the money
I know,
comes from.
I'm just saying,
But
we
the
can
cameras aren't
advocate.
a done deal.
We can advocate, all I'm saying is we can advocate.
Well,
Electoral year, we have $300 more per student.
I mean, I was not in favor of cameras, if everyone remembers, but.
go ahead.
So one of the issues that we talked about, and I think sort of slipped away, was this allocated cost of $93,000 for dean of students.
Yeah.
And I would like to make sure, and please don't hear any disrespect in the way I frame this, this is late, that's an accurate number. And if it turns out that we can get a dean of students for, I don't know, $75,000 or $65,000 or whatever it is that they cost, that might be a factor in evaluating the decision as well. So I throw that in there because y'all don't have enough to think about. Thank you.
So, do you feel you've got enough direction from us to come back in a couple of weeks? Okay, thank you very much. It was a good discussion, and we really appreciate all the work you all did on this. Thank you. All right, discussion action items. The first is the 2018-19 school calendar. Who's presenting on that?
Calendar.
Don't you need a motion with discussion action?
Well, I have no new information from the last meeting, so
Yes, I do.
if you have any questions.
Okay, so there's no modification to the calendar that was presented last time?
No.
All right, then I need a motion to approve that.
So moved.
That was Tim, is there a second? Joe? So, discussion on the calendar.
No.
Any
Scott,
questions?
I did learn one thing, but
Oh.
we did not feel that it was making an impact on this calendar, but it was new information after the last board meeting. The ACT test that is given at the high school is on a day that there was parent-teacher conferences, but that testing day doesn't go all day. So we don't feel that it interferes with parent-teacher conferences, and it shouldn't be any more burdensome on the teachers, because actually it's
Okay.
reduced time during the day.
So the calendar as presented is
It's
going to
still the
jive
same,
with
but I
all
just
of that?
wanted you
Okay.
to know there was that event.
Okay. All right, any further discussion on the calendar?
I
Yeah.
had a question, just remind me, that was 2 snow days built in?
Yes.
Other questions or discussion? All right, all in favor of approval, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, the calendar is approved. And then the last item on the agenda is the school safety resolution, which was moved from a discussion item to a discussion action item.
I would move that we approve a school safety resolution version 2 as supplied in the board packet, which removes the reference to the $100 million safety package being discussed tomorrow and makes it more flexible.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Yes, second.
From Allison, that's a second. Discussion or questions about that?
We need to sign this, or is it just going?
Well, let's take one thing at a time. I just wanted to explain the difference between the versions. I had drafted 2 versions, and I had just found out about this on Thursday night, so I am apologizing to Jonathan. I didn't know that he was here last time because I wasn't at the meeting last time. I'm not exactly sure what the concerns are, but we do have something in the resolution that does state that we are opposed to arming teachers, and I think that hopefully, this is a resolution. It is only a position to say to our legislators, we really believe that strongly that you should do something, and here is this resolution. If we need to make changes to our policies, that would be in a different way, and I would think that we would definitely be involving the SCA in that. I'm speaking this direction, and hoping I'm seeing nodding heads. But to me, it's important that we pass a resolution tonight, that we sign it, and that I'll email it right away to our legislators just to reinforce that we really believe strongly in this. I'm not sure anything will happen, but other districts are doing this the same as well tonight, or have already done it, and time is of the essence. To explain the difference in the 2 versions, they're exactly the same except for the second to the last paragraph. The first one was as a result of WASB asking us to pass resolutions holding the legislature accountable because they're kind of playing, the Senate and Assembly are playing with procedure right now, and what's going to end up happening is nothing's going to get passed. At the same time, the package developed by Walker really wasn't very well defined. It wasn't out there, and after I started reading more about it, I personally wasn't in support of it because it's a one-time flash in the pan type bill. It does not address some of the things specifically related to things that we would like to see, and I don't know if I am convinced, and from everything I'm reading, that creating another layer in the government to actually oversee this is the right thing, or at least it's in the right area. So what I did is created a second version that just said that we really need something that is more flexible and sustainable, meaning that it's something that we can use more than 1 year, and that it directly addresses the socio-emotional needs of our students and staff. I'm saying this off the top of my head because I don't have it here, but, and we don't have it up. Just to make sure, that meets the social and emotional needs of our students and therefore calls on lawmakers to use this moment to stop playing politics with school safety and security and do the most good for our students and schools. That was the only difference in that. And I don't know if anyone has any other suggestions to changes.
I thought it was good.
No, I thought it was pretty good, and I've been reading other ones too, and I think it actually puts everything that we've been looking for the people is concerned about it.
Yeah, I would agree. I like this version much better than the first one. The Walker plan, which is still very nebulous, it hasn't been completely explained yet.
Yeah.
It's not only one-time money and adds another layer of decision makers on how to allocate the money, but the governor isn't saying where that money's going to come from. He's only saying that it's going to be budget neutral, which means that $100 million's got to come from somewhere else. Well, you know, if it's going to come out of school aid, I don't think that's going to be much help to any of us. The Evers proposal is for an additional $50 million in revenue authority for districts, which makes a lot more sense to me because that's ongoing. It's something that we get to control. We can decide on it. And because Tony Evers wants it, I don't imagine the legislature is going to pass it. But no, I think this is good. Does anybody else have comments or questions?
Well, we talked a little bit about the reinstating the gun purchase waiting period, but we decided not to include it, so.
To include what?
It's too complicated. The waiting period for certain gun purchases.
Oh.
I did have, we don't mention high-capacity ammunition clips. Is that,
We do, but we do have rapid fire devices.
yeah,
I mean,
I know you can keep going.
Yeah.
There's lots of
Yeah.
things to add. I'm fine with it as it is,
think
and I
it's-
appreciate you doing it, Donna.
thanks.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor of approval, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, so please stick around afterwards so we can all sign this so Donna can send it off to the people who need to see it. Future board meetings. We have 2 meetings in April. The next one is in 2 weeks on the 2nd. The next one is 2 weeks after that. And then the reorganization meeting, which is only reorganization, is on April 23rd. WASB, new school board member gathering here in Stoughton, is April 19th. I think, yeah, it is. It's very fortunate for the incoming new board member. Finance meets on April 16th, policy meets on April 2nd. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Joe, and then second from Frank. Any discussion?
Can we fight over who said it first?
This was only 3 hours long, we still got time. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you, we are adjourned.
And then